will de-escalate a little bit following an angry response to the actions of ICE agents. LBC's Washington correspondent Simon Marks says he's dubious.
I think he wants to divert people's attention away from Minneapolis so that he can try and bury these questions about whether he's going to fire key members of his inner circle. Because Kristi Noem indicated last night, everything she said last weekend when she was slandering Alex Pretty, everything she said she was directed to say. So that's a massive problem for the White House.
The Prime Minister says it's in the UK's interests to engage with China. Sir Keir Starmer is hoping to strengthen business ties with the country during his 3-day visit, the first since Theresa May in 2018. The Defence Secretary hasn't ruled out Russian drones being linked to dozens of mysterious RAF jet call-outs. LBC has learned of 35 occasions where typhoons have been scrambled with no reason provided by the Ministry of Defence. Officials say that's due to national security concerns. John Healey has responded to suggestions Russian drones may be the reason.
Russian activity and Russian aggression has not just been rising in Ukraine, it's been rising across Europe on NATO's eastern flank, and we've seen in our own seas a 30% rise in Russian vessels intruding into our wider UK waters in the last year. And for typhoons based at Lossiemouth, I'm proud to say that's their job. When they're scrambled, they're doing their job.
The Chancellor has told LBC the current student loan system is fair, despite a former Deputy Prime Minister warning it needs an overhaul. Sir Nick Clegg says it's worth considering to tackle levels of graduate debt amid concerns it is spiralling. Rachel Reeves insists people only pay it back when they can afford to do so.
So if you are able to get a job that pays a good wage, you'll pay that money back quicker. But if you're never able to repay, that loan will eventually be written off. I think that is a fair system. Around half of people go to university today, but half don't. And it is not right that people who don't go to university are having to bear all the cost for others to do so.
And more than 1,100 jobs are at risk after the original factory shop fell into administration. All of its 137 stores, which sell clothing and homeware at a discount, could close. In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed down 53 points at 10,154. The pound buys $1.37 and €1.15. LBC weather, increasingly cloudy conditions tonight with patchy rain and dense fog in eastern Scotland and England. Clearer and drier in the west, lows of -2. Fog lingering in central and eastern areas tomorrow, mostly cloudy with the odd bright spell in places. Some light rain in northeast Scotland and the southwest, a high of 10 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Amelia Cox.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with Iain Dale.
Hello, a very good evening. 5 minutes past 7 is the time on LBC. It's Iain Dale here with you until 10. As well as listening to us, obviously you can now watch the whole programme live on Global Player, the LBC app and the LBC YouTube channel. In our first hour, I want to talk about both Iran and China. We'll be talking to Aggie Chambray about Keir Starmer's visit to Beijing a little later in the hour. But first, let's turn our attention to what's going on in the Persian Gulf. Because over the last week or two, there's been very clear evidence that the United States has been moving what President Trump has called an armada of ships to the Persian Gulf from the South China Seas. And also, I think there have been others that have come through the Mediterranean. Now, speculation has been rife about what this armada is there to do. It had been thought that it would be there to support military action against Iran if the Iranian government continued slaughtering the protesters. It's now understood that possibly more than 30,000 people lost their lives during those protests at the hands of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. But President Trump today has told Iran that time is running out to make a deal on its nuclear program, as he warned a massive armada was on its way to the country. Now, we know that there have been tensions between Iran and the United States ever since the Iranian Revolution of 1979. So it's not maybe unusual for all these tensions to sort of spill over. However, Do you think it's right that President Trump should effectively copy what Lord Palmerston used to do back in the 19th century and use gunboat diplomacy to get his own way diplomatically? I mean, this may be a bit of a bluff by Donald Trump, but essentially sending a message to the Iranian regime, well, if you don't start negotiations on your nuclear capabilities, you know what the results will be. It may be that Trump has no intention at all of using this military might against Iran, but is just using it as a bargaining chip to get the Iranians to effectively negotiate from a very weak position. I wonder what you think of that thesis. But if the Americans do decide to take military action, there'll be a lot of people in Iran that hope they will. The protests, from all we can gather, are not taking place in the quantities that they were taking place. So it may be that this is going to spark them into life again. But if they do take military action, do you think Britain should be there alongside the United States? Well, there is also evidence that RAF fighter planes have been deployed to be based in Qatar to support any military action. Is that the right thing for the British government to do? Well, let's talk to General Jack Keane. He is a retired four-star general, most senior rank in the US Army, and also its former Vice Chief of Staff. And he now chairs the American think tank, the Institute for the Study of War. General Keane, very good evening to you. What do you make of the deployment of what President Trump is calling an armada?
Well, I think it's quite considerable what is taking place here. I believe what the United States and likely Israel are doing is to set the conditions for the collapse of this regime. They know full well that this regime is the weakest it's ever been in its 45-plus year history, politically, economically, and militarily. And I don't for a minute think that the negotiations that are being offered are likely more to create division inside the leadership in Iran, because they know full well the Ayatollah has already made statements to the effect that he has no interest in making any deal. He wants to recover his nuclear program. He's already increasing his ballistic missile program. We have evidence of that. And he wants to continue to support the proxies in the region and export terrorism. In other words, no change going forward from the Ayatollah. And this, I think, is something the administration here is trying to do that they tried with the Maduro regime to create division inside the leadership. And they actually had some success in talking to some of those leaders prior to the military operation that we did conduct. And I know for a fact we are talking to Iranian leaders right now at a lower level than the Ayatollah, obviously. So I definitely believe that military action is going to take place. It's just a matter of time in doing it. And I think that the thought in mind is, as I said, to set the conditions. Military action will further weaken the regime, encourage the protesters, and also fulfill a promise that President Trump had made to the protesters that he would come to their assistance. And he appears, as we have seen throughout this last year, to be a person of his word.
What kind of targets would they be intending to hit, do you think?
Leadership targets for sure, to include civilian this time. Obviously, military leaders who are repressing the regime. That is clear. They also distribution ports for the export of oil, which would shut down their exporting the oil. Also, they have to go after the ballistic missile programs, because one of the reasons these ships are being brought into the region is knowing full well that Iran will retaliate. They have the capability to hit U.S. bases and Israel. They certainly have proved that in the past. And not that they can sustain it very long, but that the ballistic missile program will definitely be targeted quite comprehensively to make certain that that retaliation cannot be effective.
And presumably Israel would be involved in these strikes as well.
Oh, there is absolutely no doubt in my mind that Israel will be very much involved. The United States and Israel likely working together on the details of the intelligence and the details of the actual operational plan of execution.
Tell us how these decisions are made in practice. I mean, you've been in the room when, well, I was going to say similar decisions. I'm not sure they were similar decisions. But, I mean, is it that the military provides the president with different options, discusses them with the president, and then he decides which one to go for? Is it as basic as that?
Well, the options to take actions, first of all, take military action or not take military action, that has to be argued and discussed. And then the options of military action themselves. And what takes place is the presented an option and then certainly making certain that the president understands the risk associated with those options in terms of risk to mission success and to risk to our own troops in the area and our allies and partners in the area. And when you're dealing with this and you look at particularly Iran's ability to retaliate, likely part of the option you're presenting to the president is to negate that retaliation as much as possible to make certain it's not successful. The operation in Venezuela, much of that operation to be able to get a relatively small force into a military base and then into the compound on that military base, one, not be detected, and two, not to have reaction to it, and then coming out, people knowing it was there, not to react to it, and to be able to suppress all the military capability to do that. It's certainly being discussed as it pertains to the unique situation in Iran, but it's the same principle involved to reduce retaliation, and that really expands the nature of the operation to be able to do that.
Let me read you a text from a listener called Valerie who says, the United States are not the world police. What gives them the right to do this when they're shooting their own citizens? Hypocrisy at its best. Several other of my listeners are saying this is just a deflection tactic to get the headlines away from what's happening in Minnesota and with the Epstein files. What do you make of that?
Oh, good grief. Give us a little bit of a break here, please. I mean, Iran since 1982 has been killing the United States citizens. They blew up 2 embassies in 82, Kuwait, Lebanon, 241 Marines killed in a barracks. 1994, they blew up our barracks and killed scores of others. They killed somewhere in the neighborhood of 600 plus recorded American soldiers using advanced IED to do that, designed just for American tanks and American fighting vehicles. These guys have as much blood on their hands killing Americans as they have done, as Al-Qaeda did on 9/11. Not only that, they pounded our ally in the region, Israel, and tried to destroy the state of Israel, as we have seen over the last 2 years. The justification in taking this regime finally off the table after 4+ decades of destabilizing the region and the horror that they have caused in this region, and particularly to the United States of America, is completely justified, and it's about time to get on with it.
Well, I tend to agree with you. However, the fact that I'm getting this stream of text from people who seem to be taking Iran's side over America, I mean, that is where America's reputation is at the moment, not just in this country, but I think in many other European countries, where people will always think the worst of American intentions. And with some of the actions that this president has taken, you have to understand why.
Well, do we really disagree with what he did with the operation in capturing Maduro, which was a very limited amount of force, certainly a risk to the force itself, but actually going in and arresting a dictator who had been there for 14 years and imposed and along with Chavez destroyed the country? Did he really disagree with the United States attacking Iran to destroy its nuclear program, which we all knew was within months of finally reaching the kind of stage that it could be weaponized? I'm stunned they actually have to even make a case here for this. It seems stupid, to be quite frank about it.
General, it's always good to talk to you. Thank you for coming on our programme tonight. That's General Jack Keane there. We'll take some calls in a moment and talk to another guest, an Iranian-American historian who I suspect might have a slightly different view from General Keane. 16 minutes past 7.
This is LBC. This is LBC with Iain Dale. Call 0345 6060 973.
18 minutes past 7 on LBC. We're asking you whether you think that Britain, if America does take action against Iran, should be part of that military action. I know that I know that's a question which will even infuriate people, but we are America's closest ally. Even now we are. We know that British planes have been redeployed, I think, from the base in Cyprus to Qatar. So it looks as if that decision has already been made. John says he's playing you all again. Why do you keep falling for this? It's all distraction from Minnesota and Epstein, yet you all in the media just dance to his tune. I don't know how we're dancing to his tune. All I'm doing is asking you some questions as to what you think Britain's involvement should be, if any, if it goes ahead. Well, Dr. Arash Azizi joins me, an Iranian-American historian who's a lecturer at Yale University, and he's the author of the books The Shadow Commander, Soleimani, the US and Iran's Global Ambitions, and What Iranians Want, Women, Life and Freedom. Dr. Azizi, thank you very much for joining us here on LBC. What do you make of the deployment of American ships to the Persian Gulf? Do you think, like General Keane that we spoke to a moment ago, do you think this means that military action against the regime is inevitable?
Hello, thank you so much for having me. It's not inevitable, but it's very likely because it's quite clear that President Trump, look, it's clear what he wants to do. I think he prefers some sort of a deal, but he wants a real deal. Like he wants the regime to give up so much, and if they don't do it, I think he will take action. He's trigger happy when he needs to be. So I think it's quite likely that we'll have some sort of an action, unless the regime is really able to take some drastic action, to some deal making, which I don't really see. So I think at least one round of hitting on both sides is quite likely to happen.
Now, General Keane said that he thinks that the Iranian regime is at its weakest since the revolution in 1979, and therefore this would take advantage of that. That may be the case, but Iran is very capable of hitting back against any military action, isn't it? Not just to American forces in Qatar or the ships, but also to Israel.
Yes, Iran is able to hit back. Now, it hasn't, done much hitting back in the past. Ayatollah Khamenei, is the supreme leader of Iran, is a bit of a coward, frankly, and he talks more than he walks. So effectively, he's allowed this situation to happen. That U.S. and Israel and others don't take him seriously, because now the official Iranian military doctrine, as declared, is that any attack, Iran is going to respond with fire, and everybody is going to attack Israel, is going to attack others, but they're not sure how much they'll do that. And the other point is that, yes, Iran does have a lot of capabilities to hit back, but its capabilities dwarfs next to those of Israel and the U.S. still. I.e., if U.S. and Israel want to bring real hurt to Iran, they can, but at the same time, regime might not. Regime might decide to fight the last fight. Just because it's weak doesn't mean that it doesn't have a lot of capabilities to still fight. And frankly, in some ways, it would be to its benefit and not to the benefit of Trump, and actually not to the benefit of Israel in some way, if we have some sort of prolonged war. So it's not an easy and shut case for Trump.
How would this be justified under international law?
Are we still doing that? International law, I'm like barely actually joking, right? I mean, we've just had the action in Venezuela. The reality is, that effectively it doesn't seem to be, President Trump doesn't even pretend to be much interested in it. The Iranian regime certainly hasn't been interested in it. Israel hasn't been interested in it. So any takeoff between these three, I don't see any of them particularly worried about international law. The job of those who do care about international law is to point out, what are violations, but also when all the three sides violate it, right? You effectively operate in a situation of lawlessness.
Do you think this could be just a bluff? That, I mean, we talk about in our history Lord Palmerston, who was Foreign Secretary and Prime Minister back in the middle of the 19th century. He engaged in what we call gunboat diplomacy. Now, he used those gunboats on quite a lot of occasions, but often they were used to threaten a country to bring it into line. And I wonder whether that is possibly what Donald Trump is doing here, to bring Iran to the table to negotiate from a very weak position.
Yes, no, I know all about Lord Palmerston. In fact, I was teaching about him yesterday.
Sorry, I didn't mean to appear to lecture you.
No. I'm glad you brought him up. I'm glad you brought him up, because I think it's an excellent analogy on your part, and I think that's exactly what it is. So I think basically that's exactly what Trump thinks. He thinks, I'll bring the gunboats and force Iran to do the deal that I want, because we know Trump doesn't like long wars, right? He doesn't like long conflicts, so it's but it's also, we also know that he is not a person who bluffs without doing things, right? He pulled out of a nuclear deal. He killed Qasem Soleimani in 2020. He attacked Iranian nuclear sites last year. So we know that he does walk the walk when he needs to. But from the Iranian perspective, from any Iranian national interest perspective, the regime must give up all that it needs to give up to avoid this war, because any prolonged war will be disastrous for Iranian people. It's just hard to imagine after this massacre that we've just gone through, after everything that we've gone through, another war will be just the worst thing that could happen. But from regime perspective, they might be like, okay, if Trump wants to attack, we'll go with him and we'll have a more prolonged conflict and we'll keep things going for a while. So there are those who will advocate that, but there are yet others who are currently talking to Trump and will try to get some sort of a deal out of him. Look, one thing that is also very important here is that internal factions of the regime might use this opportunity to effectively bring about a Venezuela-style change in Iran. So they sideline Khamenei, they either officially or non-officially, they sideline him, they take over the reins, they give Trump what he wants, which is some sort of recognition, pullback of the nuclear program, perhaps even promises, again, officially or non-officially to Israel that Iran won't be hostile to it, make some basically real changes in the country's foreign policy, and avoid a war and perhaps even get some favor by Trump. Because if at the end of the situation, Donald Trump does what he does and says, oh no, these guys are great now, I'll work with them, they've made the changes, obviously this will help the longevity of whatever power structure there is in Iran. So they might try to do that, even if that would require some sort of a coup in Iran. But the question is, who is able to pull that in Iran? And that doesn't have an easy answer either.
And just finally, what effect might this have on the people that have been protesting since the beginning of the year? Because those protests, I think, have been stamped upon. We understand that more than 30,000 people have been killed in the most brutal manner throughout these protests. Do you think that any military strike by America might bring people back out on the streets, because they would see that as finally someone coming to their aid?
Well, depends what kind of attacks there are, but what can people do with their protests? So it's kind of hard to predict. But yes, there are scenarios in which if Trump does certain attacks, people feel emboldened, they'll come out in high numbers again, and effectively what they'll need is for the security forces to crack basically and to defect and bring about some sort of a change. But the situation is highly hard to predict. It's also possible that if we have a sort of a war situation, this keeps people at home, as we saw last year during the Iran-Israel war. But the sad reality here is that Iranians have now paid with their lives. Thousands of Iranians, possibly tens of thousands of Iranians, were killed in this recent round of protests just because they want what everybody else have. They want basic life, not even like they want democracy, but even before democratization, they just want minimum of a decent life. And the reality is those who will make decisions that will write the next page of Iranian history, most of them are not these people, because people are not organized. So it's going to be US, it's going to be Israel, and it's going to be different factions inside the regime. But people at different stages will try to, make their stamp on history, if you will try to play their role by coming out and by politically organizing.
Well, I'm delighted that Lord Palmerston is being taught at Yale. Thank you very much indeed. That's Dr. Arash Azizi there from Yale University. Right, let's go to your calls. Jeff is in Munich. Hello, Jeff.
Ja, hi, grüß dich, Ian.
Gleichfalls.
Yeah, what I like to say is I was a soldier a long time ago. Yeah, And I know that people don't fight for people they do not respect and they do not value. So I don't think that anything is going to work under Donald Trump.
Well, you assume that American armed forces don't support Donald Trump. Many of them undoubtedly do.
Well, he's looking for NATO allies if you're going to take on Iran. Yeah? And he has called the entire rest of NATO cowards who ran away in Afghanistan. So who is going to be there for him when he wants to go into Iran? Yeah?
Well, I'm not sure that he needs anybody there. An American firepower from their warships, may well be enough. I've got no idea. I'm not a military person, but I don't think this is the kind of action that necessarily needs a lot of NATO countries to row in behind.
Yeah, but the game that Trump is playing is, a political demonstration of, how hard he is. But we are living in a world where we need some moral people in charge. Yeah.
Well, fine. You can wish for that, but
Iran or all over the place. We need something which has a future, which builds a future for the rest of us.
Well, and let's all have motherhood and apple pie. We'd all like that, but the fact is we have to deal with the situation as it is. We have this brutal regime in Iran that has killed tens of thousands of its own people in the most terrible way in an attempt to suppress these perfectly reasonable protests. And I think the people who've been engaging in those protests yet again feel that the rest of the world has let them down. So if Trump comes to their rescue, if that is the objective behind these fugitive strikes, then fine.
What form of rescue can a person with so little morals like Trump provide to the people of Iran? Yeah.
Well, again, you're just adopting the sort of why school of thought, and that doesn't get us anywhere, does it? We have to deal with the situation as it is. This is reality, not fantasy.
Well, if you're working on one side of a bad thing, every single problem in the world, Northern Ireland, Palestine, Israel, has been solved by people who sit down and talk to each other. Not fighting, not weapons of war. Yeah? People who
often there have to be weapons of war. We wouldn't have emerged from the Second World War if we hadn't fought the Second World War. No one was, that people were actually suggesting sitting down with Hitler at the beginning of the war, but we all know that would not have got us anywhere. Sometimes you're dealing with deeply evil people, and I do class the Iranian regime as that, with whom there can be no jaw.
Yeah, but how did South Africa get solved?
Well, fine, you can indulge in whatever whataboutery you like.
Down and talk to him. How did Northern Ireland get solved? People had a Good Friday Agreement where they had to give up things.
And the British Army fought against the evil of the IRA terrorists over many years. So don't pretend it was all about talking.
I was in Belfast. I had the rain at 3 a.m. I saw my boys die. And I was kicked by little children, 6 years old, shouting Brits out and spitting on me. I saw it.
Yeah, but you knew that you were fighting on the right side.
It's hard to be on the right side.
Oh, for goodness sake.
No.
There is no moral equivalence between the British Army in Northern Ireland and the IRA terrorists who brutally went around murdering perfectly innocent people, is there?
I was there as a soldier, an officer in Northern Ireland, in the Royal Marines Commandos, and I saw it and I experienced it. And I know what it was like, and I've been trying to forget that the whole of my life. And what I want to see is people talking to each other, not getting the guns out. Is that okay to say?
And in an ideal world, I'm with you. But we don't live in an ideal world. And sometimes the world... The people who are on the right side of history, and I'm not suggesting that necessarily Donald Trump will be, but sometimes we have to stand up and make a stand. And that is all I'm suggesting that would be happening here. It's what happened in Venezuela, where 99% of the Venezuelan population are thanking Donald Trump for what he did there. And I suspect that a very high proportion of the Iranian population would thank him if he did take action against the Iranian regime now. But feel free to let me have your views. Jeff, thank you very much. It's 7:32 on LBC. Let's get the latest news headlines with Amelia Cox.
Iran says it will defend itself if pushed, but is ready to discuss its nuclear program with the US. Donald Trump has warned a massive naval force is headed for the Middle East and time is running out for a deal. At least 2 federal agents involved in the death of US citizen Alex Pretty in Minneapolis on Saturday have been suspended. US media says they were put on leave as part of standard procedures. And a danger to life flood warning has been issued in Dorset after Storm Chandra brought heavy rain and strong winds. Homes have been evacuated near Christchurch and a lorry driver died in a weather-related crash in the New Forest in Hampshire. LBC weather, increasingly cloudy conditions tonight with patchy rain and dense fog in eastern Scotland and England. Clearer and drier in the west, lows of -2 degrees.
This is LBC. Dale on LBC.
Emad says, Ian, as a British Iranian closely in contact with the Iranian diaspora, I can assure you that the majority of Iranians inside Iran would welcome a US attack following the brutal massacres of the regime killing 30,000 plus innocent protesters in the most brutal way. Britain should surely support US actions if we still consider ourselves to be a source of good in the world. A regime that kills its own people would be ruthless if they get the chance on any nuclear weapons. I don't disagree with a word of that, and I hope some of the quislings, and I use that word deliberately, who are texting in at the moment, trying to make out that Britain and America are the evil countries in the world rather than a brutal regime like Iran. We can all go to hell, frankly. Let's go to Archie in Balham. Archie, hi.
Hi, Ian. How you doing?
Good, apart from when I look at my text screen.
Yeah, no, it's quite worrying, that, actually, isn't it? Some of those comments you get.
Well, I think it really is. I mean, it does make you wonder who these people are and which side they're actually on.
Yeah, no, I don't quite understand it. I think, any opportunity to take out the Iranian regime should be viewed as a positive thing for all the crimes they've committed to their own people and all the funding of terrorism they've done around the world. I think I can only see it as a positive, really, so I'd support British and American action in the region.
What might the consequences of that be, though? Because some will argue, well, if you destabilise the Iranian regime and eventually it falls and something better takes its place, which, I mean, you don't know that will happen, but that would be the hope. You could argue, I think, that given the strikes against the nuclear bases by America and Israel a good few months ago, given the fact that Hezbollah and Hamas have been neutralised, you could make a good argument that the Middle East is in a very, very good position to be much more peaceful over the next 10 years than it has been in the last 10 years, assuming that the whole Gaza conflict is properly resolved.
Yeah, that needs properly resolving, but I think as long as they're still in charge of Iran, the regime that's in charge currently, then I think they'll only carry on funding, the Houthi rebels and perhaps Hamas and the guys in Lebanon. They'll come back, in a few years' time and be just as devastating to Israel as they have been and destabilise the region further. So I think we need to go further and try and assist the Iranian people in, getting some level of freedom, really, and some democracy in their country.
Thank you very much indeed, Archie. Right, we'll come back to your calls on this in just a moment. But first, let me tell you who's on Cross Question a bit later at 8 o'clock. We have Eric Pickles, Lord Pickles, Conservative peer, former Conservative Cabinet Minister. Paul Richards, former Labour advisor to Cabinet Ministers in the Blair-Brown government. Silke Carlo, Director of the Civil Liberties and Privacy campaign group Big Brother Watch. And James Starkey, partner of the 5654 consultancy, who is an advisor to various Conservative Cabinet Ministers. They'll be here at 8 to answer your questions. You might want to ask them about what we're talking about now and indeed what we're about to talk about, because Keir Starmer has begun a 3-day visit to China, but the Conservatives and Lib Dems have both criticised the Prime Minister for travelling to Beijing. Well, let's hear now from LBC's Deputy Political Editor Aggie Shornbrae and her thoughts on how important this visit to China by the Prime Minister is.
Well, I think it's hugely important for the Prime Minister. It is obviously a bit of a gamble. He is the first Prime Minister to go to China since 2018 when Theresa May went. And there are a lot of critics of him going at all, not least in his party. And it follows, of course, the UK finally, after numerous delays, allowing the Chinese embassy to be built near Tower Bridge. And, there was a lot of opposition to that too. And when I talk about the risks as well, I think it's worth noting there are security risks as well. And I think that's been acknowledged. Well, it's been acknowledged by, MI5 and MI6, but also acknowledged by the fact that, and the Times have reported this, number 10 staff that are going on this visit to China have taken burner phones and temporary email addresses because of that security concerns. And then there's the opposition too, who have been very, very critical of this. Kemi Badenoch, of course, the Conservative Party leader, has said she would not go to China.
He is going there from a position of weakness. And it looks to me like the Labour Party's policy is for economic dependence on China. Pretty much everything Ed Miliband is doing relies on Chinese wind farms, solar farms, electric vehicles. We're not building, while deindustrializing our own economy and not building any manufacturing capacity. That is going to be terrible for our future, and we need to stop that.
And Liberal Democrat Deputy Leader Daisy Cooper, who was up at Deputy Prime Minister's questions earlier today, also criticised it. She said whilst the Chinese regime still holds British citizen Jimmy Lai captive in prison, and whilst the Chinese regime continues to hunt down pro-democracy protesters on the street of Britain with bounties on their heads, the British PM has gone cap in hand to China to ask for a trade deal on the promise of a super embassy from which the Chinese regime will continue to spy on us. And just on that note about Jimmy Lai, about human rights issues, the Prime Minister is having a meeting tomorrow. He arrived today in China. He's having a meeting tomorrow with Chinese President Xi Jinping and other senior officials. He has come under pressure to raise human rights issues, to talk about the British national and pro-democracy activist Jimmy Lai and the treatment of Uyghur minority. Now, the Prime Minister's spokesman said Britain always takes human rights offences very, very seriously, but they haven't said whether or not Sir Keir Starmer will raise those issues in that meeting. In fact, he himself has said, in the past, on all the trips I've done, I've always raised issues that need to be raised, but I don't want to get ahead of myself on the specifics until I've had the opportunity. I think it's worth saying too, Iain, that he is taking about 60, almost 60 representatives of British businesses and cultural institutions. They are accompanying the Prime Minister as he's attempting to build these bridges with Beijing.
He's got the Business Minister, Peter Kyle, there.
He has.
Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, she was supposed to be going, but I've seen pictures of her today in a pub.
I think that was yesterday.
That was it. And they've taken the City Minister, Lucy Rigby. Now, why is that? I mean, should we read anything into that?
I don't think we should read anything into that. I don't think we know exactly why she wasn't going to go. But you're right, it was very much trailed. It was, Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, and the Prime Minister supposed to be there together. But no, Rachel Reeves has been here announcing the details of the U-turn on business rates, actually speaking to our colleague, political editor Natasha Clark, in a pub yesterday evening instead. But yeah, you're right, he's taken Peter Kyle, the Business Secretary, and Lucy Rigby to the Business Minister.
And China is our third biggest trading partner. So it's a country, whatever we think about the security issues here, we have to deal with. I mean, what's success for Keir Starmer when he comes back on the plane on, was it Friday? What will he be able to say that makes us all think, oh, he did a good job there?
I think it's a really good question. I think there are lots of people who will want him to have raised those issues that I just talked about. And I think some people will struggle with saying it was a success unless those things were raised. But I think it's also coming back with some deals, some sort of economic wins out of that trip to China, which, some would say maybe the UK would have got anyway. But by bringing the businesses along and those cultural institutions along, I think they are basically hoping to say, look, there were all these meetings, these were the economic wins out of this, and this is why it was a really good idea to build these bridges with China.
That's Aggie Chambray, LBC's deputy political editor. Right, back to your calls and messages on Iran and this build-up of American military force at their base in Qatar. Melanie has sent a charming message saying, how do you know that you couldn't have solved a problem with Hitler at the beginning? You don't have to be Einstein to work out that trying to negotiate with Hitler, as Chamberlain found out, was effectively like dealing with the devil. Melanie continues in her charming way. You are a typical English person who thinks that they are on the right side as though they didn't F up the world in the first place. Supremacist and delusional. Melanie, I'm proud to be English. I'm proud to be British. I am proud of the role that this country played in the Second World War, fighting fascism, fighting Nazism. Without Britain, basically, most of Europe would have continued to be under German rule. I'm sure the Germans in the end would have invaded this country too. And yes, the Americans came to our aid, and probably without them, we would not have been able to prevail. But Britain held the line for the first few years of the Second World War. And I suggest you go and read some history books, and you might send less ignorant messages in the future. Tony is in Birmingham. Hello, Tony.
Hey, Ian, you all right?
Sort of.
Yeah, great point there. History books. I love history, big fan of it. Iraq, Iran, Syria, Libya, Afghanistan, other places, all got one thing in common. They'll have exactly the same playbook, exactly the same story as what we're having now. I'm a little bit fed up of being gaslighted by these professional propagandists. That guy you had on earlier on from America, I could have predicted every word that guy said because I've heard it before, and it's all based in fiction.
He's a four-star general. Why do you speak so disrespectfully of him?
Well, if he's a four-star general, it means he's not exactly independent, doesn't it? Let's just look.
Well, it probably means he knows quite a lot about the subject. That's what I would say to you.
Someone with an obvious bias has to say. I'm interested in history, facts, reality, facts. Israel freely admits. Sorry, I'm just walking upstairs.
Well, can I suggest that you don't walk upstairs?
We've got people on the ground in Iran stoking up trouble. This is a pretty standard.
Sorry, it's us that are stirring up trouble in Iran, rather than pay tribute to the very brave people who are protesting on the streets of Iran.
Watch Israeli media. They're They don't mind admitting it. They've got people on the ground.
Did you actually hear a single word that I just said?
Yeah, you're saying like it's us that's doing it. Well, yes, it is.
Hang on. I said the exact opposite of that. I said it's not us stirring it up in Iran. It is the brave Iranian people who are trying to fight against the regime that has suppressed democracy and freedom for 50 years.
Okay, there's one problem with this discussion, though. We've seen that before, these brave, freedom-loving people who just want to be free and that. Same as in Libya, same as in Syria. And who do those people always turn out to be? Oh, yeah, the current leader of Syria, freedom-loving man, Al-Qaeda, used to have a big beard, wear the pyjamas, proper, full, out-and-out Al-Qaeda.
Well, it wasn't Al-Qaeda, it was ISIS, actually, just to be factual about it.
Yeah, and he's one of the people we backed. We've seen this before. We're not stupid. You can't keep gaslighting us. We know the playbook.
Nobody's gaslighting anybody.
Well, beg to differ, yes, we are. We've seen this all before. We know what happens. The CIA, Mossad, sends in the agitators. They create riots. They create panic. They spread fear and trouble on social media. They get the riots going. They get the bodies piling up. And then Western politicians...
Do you actually know anything about the protests that have been happening in Iran? Because initially...
Yeah, it's exactly the same as what...
No, it really isn't. This is where you're displaying your complete ignorance.
Why is Israel admitting that it's got people on the ground causing trouble? Why are they saying that?
Well, where are you getting that from? Some conspiracy website, no doubt.
No. Just listen to Israelis. This is the thing. You don't need a conspiracy theorist to tell you this.
Well, you're doing a bloody good job of being one.
It's the same as Trump, isn't it? You know, I mean, I don't need a conspiracy theorist to tell me that Trump only went into Venezuela because he wanted oil. He told us himself. These people admit this stuff. You just have to look at the news sources. You listen to them. Listen to Israel.
Frankly, I really don't want to listen to these so-called, in inverted commas, news sources that you're listening to, Tony, because they're absolutely delusional. 7:49.
On the latest episode of The Newsagents.
What does Kemi Badenoch mean when she's telling centrists to get out of her way? Are they not welcome in her Conservative Party? And what on earth is Trump's armada doing off the coast of Iran?
Get the latest episode of The Newsagents with Emily Maitlis, John Sopel and Lewis Goodall. Listen or watch on our free Global Player app or the new LBC app.
Go on.
Leading Britain's conversation. Iain Dale. Alexa, send a comment to LBC.
It's 7:52. Let's go to Sarah, who is in Nottingham. Hello, Sarah.
Hi, Sarah. It's me again. I think I spoke to you about a week ago or something. Don't you remember me?
I'm sure I will once you start speaking, Sarah.
Okay. I think I said I was your fan last time. But anyway, I wanted to completely disagree to the ignorant guy that you had before the break. I'm British Iranian. I'm part of the, obviously, Iranian diaspora. And before anyone starts saying you live here and you can't, get involved, that's literally thousands of Iranians are begging for us to be their voice because all the internet's being cut off while the Iranian people, the protests are being literally slaughtered on the streets. I can't believe what this guy's saying, how it's... I don't know, that's a conspiracy he's brought up. These protests had started grassroots from Iranian people because of high inflation prices. It started from the bazaars, merchants, and then it grew and grew. And then because the Iranian exiled prince, that everybody's shouting his name because they want him to come back, Reza Pahlavi, he basically, after 2-3 weeks of protests, he gave like a date. So on Thursday, I think it was around 8th of January, he gave a calling for people to come out at 8 o'clock one night, and literally went from thousands to millions of people across Iran. And I do mean millions. I'm not exaggerating because Iran...
And it wasn't just in Tehran. See, what he said about the CIA and Mossad, I mean, if they'd just been in Tehran... you could kind of think, well, okay, they would be able to organise that, but they wouldn't be able to organise it in the dozens, hundreds of towns and cities all across Iran, would they?
Listening to conspiracies that there's loads of Iran, the Iranian regime, they've blocked the internet for normal people, but they've got the internet for themselves, and they literally sit there because we see it on the internet. They sit there throwing their conspiracy theories. Yeah, you're right. It's literally about 200 places all across Iran. Iran's vast, and it's like big cities and small cities, and like villages. This is what's so different in this what is called a revolution now, because before it used to be like, you imagine students, the educated people are out. This time it's people that were originally on their side, conservative, religious people, even, in these little villages, even they're out, because obviously if you can't put food on the table, it's just got so bad that it's not just about economy as well, because there's just so much corruption and and it's 47 years. There's been so many uprisings. Why Iranian people actually really like Trump? Because Obama did the same thing. Obama said, we'll back you, and people came out in their thousands, and then he went and did a deal with the regime. So people in Iran actually hate Obama because they feel like they got killed. He basically used, because the regime got weak because people came out and protested, and then he went and did a deal. So they all say, don't do what Obama did to Trump. Yeah. So I understand where people are coming from. I obviously I live here. I know Trump is on his side, but in this case, he's absolutely right. And to say this is a distraction, I'm sorry, it's one person. I completely understand it's a democracy here. We live, one person dying in America is too many. But to say when you see thousands of people, I mean, they literally killed so many people. They're putting them in rubbish lorries. I mean, it's just breaks my heart.
Well, Sarah, look, I'm really glad you phoned in, because you've restored some balance to this hour, because the delusions of the previous caller and another one earlier I needed to be called out. I did my best, but you know far more about it than I do, and you've done a brilliant job. Thank you. Let's go to Omar in Camberwell. Hello, Omar.
Well, hello there. I think I'm going to spoil your party here, because the chap that you had on just now was absolutely spot on. A lot of the things he said, I wanted to say. It most definitely is a Mossad CIA operation. This is proven. Listen to what the Israelis are saying in their own newspapers. Listen to what Mark Pompeo said about Mossad walking side by side by the protesters. The first 2 days of the protest were peaceful until Mossad and CIA sent their terrorists to go and kill the people. This is all factual. Come out of your London-centric bubble. Please listen to what other people
Could you explain to me how the CIA and Mossad would have been able to orchestrate protests in hundreds of Iranian towns and cities? It's just not possible. We know these protests. We know why the protests started.
It's all documented. If you listen to the right people on the right channels, you will find the truth. The truth is...
And what are these channels? What are these channels?
Have you heard of Starlink?
Of course I've heard of Starlink, yes.
Right, 40,000 Starlink terminals were seized by the Iranian government after the process was finished. Once they locked down the internet, with the help of the Russians, and others...
And you think that was something they should have done?
They were not able to orchestrate the protests any longer, and
oh my goodness.
Stopped.
These people walk among us.
This is all proven.
Yeah.
It is out there. The truth is out there.
So you agree with the Iranians shutting down the internet?
It was shut down. Starlink was being used to orchestrate...
No, Starlink was being used by ordinary Iranians to communicate with each other.
It is proven that 40,000 Starlink terminals were seized.
Provided by Elon Musk.
It was an operation in the making for a long
time. And you see that as proof that the CIA and Mossad were... I mean, you are mad. You're not just mad, Omar. You are evil.
Listen, read their newspapers.
No, I don't want to read those newspapers because all it is propaganda which you've fallen for hook, line and sinker, and you absolutely disgust me, and I imagine you disgust most people listening to this programme. Goodbye. Dear, oh dear. I mean... what on earth possesses people to believe this ridiculous propaganda? I'm sure that Mossad have agents within Iran. I'd be disappointed if they didn't. I'm sure the CIA have people in Iran. I'm sure that MI6 have people in Iran. I would expect them to do so. But, I mean, to suggest the kind of things that he and the previous caller, Bar One, was saying, I mean, it's just evil, isn't it? Anyway, let's calm down for Cross Question, shall we? Because Cross Question is coming up in just 2 minutes' time, and we will have the Conservative peer Lord Eric Pickles with us, former Labour advisor Paul Richards, Silke Carlo from the Civil Liberties and Privacy campaign group Big Brother Watch, and James Starkey, former Conservative advisor and partner of the 5654 consultancy. No, me neither. It is 8 o'clock on LBC, time for the news headlines.
On your radio, on the LBC app, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
Large naval force heading to the Middle East. The US president says time is running out to negotiate a deal over its nuclear program. The Iranian mission to the UN says Tehran stands ready for dialogue. General Jack Keane, a retired four-star general in the US Army, told LBC he believes American military action will take place.
Military action will further weaken the regime, encourage the protesters, and also fulfill a promise that President Trump had made to the protesters that he would come to their assistance. And he appears, as we have seen throughout this last year, to be a person of his word.
Sir Keir Starmer says he's absolutely focused on national interests as he begins his visit to China. It's the first time a Prime Minister has travelled to Beijing in 8 years. The Tory leader Kemi Badenoch promised Conservative members she will lead a party of serious people, not drama queens. In a wide-ranging speech, she criticised what she called the psychodrama of both Reform UK and Labour. And the Environment Agency is telling people to remain vigilant to the risk of flooding, with more weather warnings due to Storm Chandra. Conditions are forecast to remain unsettled tomorrow and Friday. In the city, the FTSE 100's closed down 53 points at 10,154. The pound buys $1.37 and €1.15. LBC weather: patchy rain and dense fog in eastern Scotland and England tonight. Drier in the west, a low of -2. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Daryl Jackson.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
I promise I've calmed down, really. 2 minutes past 8. Welcome to Wednesday's Cross Question with me, Iain Dale. On the panel with me, to my left, Paul Richards, former Labour advisor to various cabinet ministers under Tony Blair and Gordon Brown. Lord Eric Pickles, Conservative peer and former cabinet minister and co-chair of the UK Holocaust Memorial Foundation. To my right, Silke Carlo, director of the Civil Liberties and Privacy campaign group Big Brother Watch. And next to her, James Starkey, partner of the 5654 consultancy, former advisor to Conservative cabinet ministers.
Call 0345 6060 973. Text 84850. Cross Question. Watch live on both Global Player and the new LBC app. This is LBC.
Right, let's go to our first question. It's from Scott in West Hampstead. Is President Trump's gunboat diplomacy in relation to Iran a good move if it helps to bring about a nuclear deal and a more stable Middle East? Is there a risk that the armada of US ships and planes heading for Iran might be used to bring about regime change in Iran and perhaps have the opposite effect of destabilising the region? Eric Pickles.
Well, it's a region I know extraordinarily well, and it's a region that's changed so rapidly over the last 2 years. Syria is a fundamentally different place, and so is the Lebanon. And we have to, I think, appreciate and understand that the root of most terrorism in the world, the root of quite a lot of money laundering and drug smuggling is down to the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Cadre. They are a disruptor not only in the region, but they are a disruptor in this country. They threaten the lives of just about all of us. And what Trump has done, and I am not an apologist for Donald Trump, is to change that narrative. It was felt that there was very little we had to do. The government is reluctant to call out the Revolutionary Guard, to prescribe them. They are operating terrorist schemes in this country. There is a risk with this. It's an enormous amount. I've been watching it for weeks, travel across. The Israeli newspapers and media have been full of it long before we seem to have woken up. You don't move that amount of equipment halfway around the world just for it to sit there. And I think there is a real possibility that we might see a strike by the United States on Iran. And your question is quite right. This is not risk-free. This is high-octane stuff. Things could go terribly wrong. But there's obviously a high degree of penetration within Iran by the Israeli secret services. They seem to know where people are. They are very well informed. And maybe only Trump could do something like this.
But you were in the Conservative coalition cabinet when David Cameron decided to take action against Colonel Gaddafi in Libya. Yeah. And sure enough, the Libyan people did get rid of Gaddafi with a bit of help.
Absolutely.
And then look what happened. I mean, could we not have the same thing
We
here?
could end up with something far worse. You're absolutely right. These are high-risk stuff. And, politicians, whether they're someone like Trump or someone as benign as David Cameron, they just like this kind of thing. And sometimes the military takes over. The excitement of doing it, you have the button, you press it.
That's no way to conduct military strategy, is it?
No, but I think it's how military strategy generally has been conducted for a long time. We would have surrendered to the Nazis had it not been for Churchill, and only Churchill held out the cabinet, held out the civil service, who all wanted to surrender. So you shouldn't underestimate the importance of political influence in making these kind of decisions. I'm sorry to put it so bluntly, but I think it's time we do take a bit of reality. What's going to happen is not going to be logical. It's not going to be nice. But whatever happens, I'm not sure the world will be a safer place without the current Iran leadership. It might not be safe with something worse.
Paul Richards.
Well, I think it's an example of us now being in a sort of post-rules-based order where we were entering this era of the strong man being in charge, and Trump is obviously casting himself into this role as strongman, transcending all of the norms that we've seen around NATO and even the United Nations, certainly at the alliance, with the West and so on. It's an example of that. Now, will it be successful? I think the danger is that it will actually reinforce the Ayatollahs. They will be able to say to their people, look, we told you all along that the great enemy was the Americans, and here they are with their aircraft carriers carrying out strikes on Iranian soil, and it may have the opposite effect of the one that we actually all want, which is an end of that terrible
But
regime.
Surely that message would only appeal to those who are already convinced supporters of the regime.
Well, I think the danger is, and Scott's question kind of alluded to this, that it won't be clean and clinical and easy. It will throw up an awful lot of really difficult situations, and it's very difficult to bomb your way into regime change, as we saw when the government I supported sent troops to Afghanistan and to Iraq. They hadn't thought through the peace afterwards. They hadn't thought through the nation building, the democracy building piece at all, and all chaos was then ensuing. So yes, we want to get rid of the Ayatollahs. I think Eric's absolutely right. Their role in supporting Hamas and Houthis and Hezbollah and other terrorist groups around the world, and repressing their own people, of course, is absolutely reprehensible. Whether sending in the fleet, like a sort of gunboat diplomacy from the Victorian era, I'm not sure.
Well, it did work then, didn't it, by and large?
Well, not always, no.
Not always. Okay, Silky Carlo.
I mean, is this really about regime change? Because I think that seems very unlikely. It's unclear to me what Trump's goal is in this action. There are various interests that have been bandied around, anything from protecting protesters. And obviously, as someone who's a civil liberties advocate myself, it is heartbreaking to see what the Iranians are going through and what a free and open society it once was, especially for women. It's a perilous, perilous situation and desperately sad. And I'm not sure that Trump has the soft power to deal with that, and I'm not convinced that coercive diplomacy will deal with that. But it's not clear to me at all, really, what ultimately the goal is. If it's about preventing nuclear weapons development, I thought that was something that he had achieved. He had said back in June, wasn't it, with certain strikes on the nuclear facilities back then. Obviously, the US has an interest in protecting their allies, and Iran poses a serious threat to Israel, and there's a legitimate interest there. But I'm just not sure what exactly it is that he's going to gain from this. I'm concerned about how high risk it is, as Lord Pickle said. It's incredibly high risk. And Trump's diplomacy, I think, with Russia proved to be very naive. And so that doesn't bode well for how this plays out.
Okay, James Starkey.
I think it's important to separate a couple of things, which is, it's been alluded to already, which is what exactly is your goal. So I spent 5 years living next door to Iran in post-war Iraq. I think the removal of Saddam Hussein, like the removal of the Iranian regime, which is arguably much worse, has much longer tentacles, would make the world a safer place, would make it safer for certain other countries in the region and globally. But what we want to do is we want to say, oh, that's a good thing, it's going to help the country. It doesn't. It's taken Iraq about 20 years to achieve anything resembling security, and it's almost torn the country apart. Not without a lot of assistance in a very negative way from Iran itself. So I think that when we talk about military strikes or aggression towards Iran and military strikes to Iran, we often confuse these two different things because I think it kind of makes us feel better to think that if we take out the Iranian regime, which will make the world a safer place, it's good for the Iranian people. Well, history suggests it's not. You mentioned Libya, which is not really a full country anymore. Syria, same thing, splits war. If you look at something that's not come widely to the attention here, what's going up in the Kurdish area, in Kobani. And so Will it make Iran itself a safer place? Probably not. And it will probably take a long time to recover. Will it make the world a safe? Yeah, probably so.
Would that be enough justification for doing it?
I don't know. This is the decision that politicians have to wrestle with. I think what people are talking about what Trump's doing at the moment. I don't think it's particularly new. I think the US and the West have often exercised power. I mean, was the Iraq War within international rules? That's arguable itself. Not to make a value judgment on what's good or bad, but to say it's something new, I think is not necessarily true. I think putting pressure on the Iranian regime I think the strikes on their nuclear capabilities were almost certainly a good thing. I think whatever you think of Trump, and like Lord Pickles, I'm not an apologist for Trump, I think his pressure to ease back on the protesters, that seems like it was probably a good thing too.
Do you all worry that, I mean, we've been talking about this over the last hour on LBC, and I mean, I've been really concerned by looking at my text screen here, the WhatsApp messages, the text messages, the overwhelming majority of them, up until the last few minutes after that ridiculous last caller, the overwhelming majority of them basically seem to think that the Iranian regime is some benign regime and the American regime is the real problem in the world. And they fail to understand that one is a democracy and the other one is a brutal theocracy. I mean, I don't know how we've got to the situation, and okay, you can put it in part down to Donald Trump, I suppose, where America is now the bad guy in any argument that you have with anyone in this country.
Well, this is the ridiculous idea that the enemy of my enemy is my friend, isn't it? And if you conduct your global, sort of relations based on that, you lead yourself into very dark places indeed. And in the Labour Party, we had this problem under Corbyn, where seemingly allying with all kinds of bad people simply because they were the people against the other people he didn't like more. And that's absolutely no way to do it. So yes, you have to have a critique of Trump and Trumpism and what he's doing with the world order. You can at the same time absolutely deplore this regime in Iran and want to see its people tear down the government and have a revolution in Iran, which actually puts democracy first. Now, those two things are entirely compatible with one another.
I think people live in bubbles. I think social media has extended that. And nobody's out on the streets protesting about the thousands of people that are being killed in Iran. Nobody's been out talking about the people that are being murdered in the Horn of Africa, largely because their social circles don't have a view on it. They have a view on Gaza, but they don't have a view on this. And it would be a safer world, but I think there are a number of things kind of happening now. First thing, would it be popular on the streets? Well, actually, Trump was pretty popular on the streets, but he called the people to go out. And they went out and they were killed. And I think that does slightly change the dynamics. And the second thing we were talking about, you've been in the House of Lords, you don't actually care that much about what people, no one's listening to you, so you can actually say what you say. I think we are in a state of flux in the world. And I think there is a change in terms of power. America is clearly the number one powerful country in the world, but it's on the wane. And China is likely, I suspect we'll be talking about that, is likely to become the power, not next week, not next month, not next decade, but towards the end of the century, we're going to see that. And America right now rather reminds me of Britain and France during the Suez Crisis in the 1950s. We are in that stage of change. We're, in a way, what Trump is doing, and he may well succeed in stopping the nuclear program, because they have ballistics there. They have the capability of not just hitting Tel Aviv. They have the capability of hitting Rome, of Paris, of London, and we cannot be in a world where someone like that has the control, because they have no respect whatsoever for life.
OK, we will move on to other subjects in just a few moments' time here on Cross Question. It's 16 minutes past 8.
This is LBC.
At Kia.
Question with Iain Dale. Watch live on both Global Player and the new LBC app.
18 minutes past 8 on LBC. Let me reintroduce my panel to those of you that have just joined us. James Starkey is partner of the 5654 consultancy. 5654, random numbers?
It's the Admiralty Code of the lighthouse in Godrevy, which it was where the G7 was, and it's also a point in a storm, which we like to think of ourselves.
Right, OK, well, I'm glad we've cleared that one up. James has also been an advisor to various Conservative cabinet ministers in the past, including Priti Patel and Michael Gove. Silke Carlo is director of the Civil Liberties and Privacy campaign group Big Brother Watch. Paul Richards, former advisor to Labour cabinet ministers in the Blair and Brown governments, who also ran for the party in the 2024 election. Used to be Hazel Blear's special advisor, didn't you, when she was opposing Eric in the cabinet?
I loved Hazel.
I loved Hazel. I used to call her my little chipmunk.
I never, perhaps behind her back, but never to her face.
And that was the voice of Lord Eric Pickles, Conservative peer, former Conservative cabinet minister. Right, next question comes from John in Woodford. I want my grandchildren to grow up in a peaceful world. Churchill once said we need jaw, not war. So is it really fair to criticise Keir Starmer for going to China and talking to President Xi? Well, both the Conservatives and Lib Dems have criticised Keir Starmer for making a 3-day trip to Beijing. Well, James Starkey, your old boss, the Shadow Foreign Secretary, Priti Patel, she's been quite outspoken on this.
Yeah, I think it's for quite some time. I don't think the country's had the government of the United Kingdom has had a clear enough policy on China. And I'm not really sure, when I see what's coming out of Labour at the moment, that they've quite grasped it. That's not to directly criticise them. I think it's been the case for a few years, which is that it's quite interesting. If you listen to the coverage today, we hear the government saying, well, we're going to go and do all these deals and it's okay to deal with them. At the same time, the background to the coverage is, by the way, they've all had to leave their phones and laptops at home because they're going to get spied on while they're there. So even as a kind of punter listening in, it's quite a confusing message to say, well, it's okay to do all these deals with people, but at the same time, we don't trust them enough that we can use our mobile phone there. So I think you can understand the public for being quite confused. The reality is, economically, where we are at the moment, the government feels like we need them. I think, in particular, if you look at Ed Miliband's net zero, like that, you could basically most of the wind turbines and all this kind of stuff is produced in China. So I think Labour's bound to China. They have to deal with them. But and it's also interesting that you've seen Carney, the Canadian PM. He's pivoted away from Trump and towards China, and how that plays out with Trump is playing out at the moment. Obviously, Trump's kind of saber rattling, but so and that's the backdrop as well. I think is when you've lost a usual ally in the US, where we now definitely feel less certain about them. It means that we're going to look towards Europe. We're going to look towards, we've just talked, other major powers. China are the coming power.
Sophie?
I wouldn't criticise Starmer for making a trip to China, but the question is, what is he going to get out of it, and what's his approach? We're talking about this the day after Holocaust Memorial Day, and let's not forget the atrocities that the Chinese government are currently responsible for. It's thought that there are up to 1 million people in so-called re-education camps, described by many as concentration camps, where people are suffering sterilisation, rape, murder in some cases, forced abortions, torture. There are stolen children, forced labour. This is one of the most pressing issues in the world right now, and it gets far too little attention. Of course, for economic reasons, we have to engage, and many broad strategic reasons we have to engage with the Chinese. But I don't know if Starmer has the power and the gravitas to have the kind of influence that Britain wants to have and perhaps should have in China. And I think particularly given that he comes from a human rights background, and that he talks endlessly about the rules-based system, we don't really hear that from him with regards to China. I certainly haven't. And I agree. I think that the messaging is really unclear. And that creates disillusionment in our domestic politics as well, because you don't really know what to expect from the politicians that we're electing. If you have somebody who is a human rights man, but he's currently got the red carpet rolled out in China and isn't raising those kinds of serious concerns, In 2020, there are endless things I could say about the Chinese government. In 2020, the US intercepted a shipment of 13 tons of human hair that was thought to have come from Xinjiang. Far too many people are supine about China because of their power. And I think if we're harnessing US and UK power in the right way, we absolutely should be doing something more about it. He has had nothing to say, it seems, on the plane over there about the human rights abuses by the Chinese. I'm very proud, I will say, about Big Brother Watch. In our own small way as a small team, we have lobbied for years around Chinese surveillance. And again,
so you must be delighted by the new embassy.
Not at all, not at all. And you know what? I think that one of the things that's most depressing about that is actually the symbolism. It's where it is. It's almost that giant embassy right by the river, right by Tower Bridge, is almost going to be a landmark in our city, in our capital, and that has symbolic power. But in terms of surveillance, we did a lot of campaigning around the hike vision cameras, which are all over this country. Chinese state-owned company that has surveillance cameras plastered up and down the country, including in government buildings. Terrible security risk. Big Brother Watch got Tesco, Morrison's, Iceland, Marks, Co-op to take these cameras out of their supermarkets. So we've had success as a small campaign group. Surely the British government under Starmer can step up and show a bit more grit and a bit more power, and I think that's disappointing so far.
Paul?
Well, I think you have to go in with your eyes wide open. And I remember when Gordon Brown's team, including him actually as Prime Minister, went to China, they were subject to espionage, and indeed one of the entourage from the UK had their phones stolen by a glamorous Chinese spy. And there was quite, I'm not going to name them, but there was quite the incident, as you might imagine, Ian. But so that's why they've left their mobiles at home, James. I think quite right too. So of course we know there is espionage, and also on a serious point, we do know the things that Silky has spoken in terms of the Uyghurs, about the condition of people in Hong Kong, about some of the absolutely horrific human rights abuses. And the Labour government does raise these with their counterparts, it must be said. But the pivot here is the idea you just ignore China, that somehow you boycott China, you cut yourself off from Chinese goods and trade. I defy anyone listening to this, LBC listeners, to look around their homes and imagine a home without anything in it made from China, including what you're wearing right now. They do dominate global trade. So what are we going to do?
Well, they're
Ignore
our
them or
third biggest
trade with
trading
them?
partner, aren't they?
They're what?
They're our third biggest trading partner.
Right, and I think, and trade is good. We want free trade, and we don't want tariffs. And if we have an unreliable ally in the shape of the current American administration, like Carney, we are going to have to shop around, and that's what this is all about. So Silky said what's going to come out of it: jobs, investment, growth in the UK.
It's interesting the point you made about Chinese goods, because when the Uyghur situation first reared its ugly head, I wanted a new laptop. So I said to my computer guy, I said, I don't want one that's Chinese. Just get me a laptop that... He said, it's impossible, because all of the ones that you think are not Chinese, actually most of the components in them are. Eric?
Yeah, absolutely. iPhones. Well, I think... Unlike everyone else around the table, I have signed a trade deal in China on behalf of the British government. And that went at a time when Dave was taking the Chinese leader for a...
Because you weren't ever trade minister, were you?
No. But, I was the Secretary of State, so we get to do these kind of things. So let's not pretend this idea that they've suddenly started spying on us. I couldn't take my phone. I couldn't take anything that was electronic with me. And there are boxes, as everyone... But most people around this, so there are boxes in every department that, should a Chinese delegation arrive, you put all your electronic stuff in, because there's usually a guy comes with a briefcase, and they will just swipe just about everything. But
do we do that to them?
I kind of hope so. I kind of hope we are, but I suspect we're probably using Chinese equipment in order to spy on the Chinese, or the irony. But we are. You're right. We've got to come to terms now. Even if Donald Trump was a kind of a Europhile, even if he was absolutely tied with Europe, we would still have to come to some kind of accommodation. Now, whether the way in which the Prime Minister is going about it is the right way, I'm not entirely sure, because the point about the Uyghurs is right. Now, you tackle, as I have tackled, Chinese politicians about this, and they say, "Oh, well, these people are terrorists." I know they're not. I know they're absolutely not. But what they say, these people are terrorists. We're doing the West a favour. We are educating them in the benefits of modern life. But there is going to be a point down the road, and that point is Taiwan, when we are going to have to decide. Mm-hmm. And if China wants to take it by force, and if America cannot be relied on, there is nothing to stop them.
It's always intrigued me, because cabinet ministers always say they're going to raise human rights issues, particularly the Prime Minister, when they go to these countries.
They expect it.
And they do expect it. But you've had personal experience of this. Do you feel you have to be very polite when you do it and say, well, of course, I have to raise this, but I need to question you about X, Y, and Z? And have you ever had any bad reaction when you've done that?
Well, I mean, it's there are ways of being tough, and there are ways of being rude, and you mustn't allow yourself to get into a position whereby they can't hear what you're saying because you're being rude, and that would be a disaster. But of course, but I have to say, I personally found that was part of a ritualised dance. They were going to say this, they knew I was going to say it, they weren't too worried about me going to say it, and they were going to give this in response. But we have to come to some kind of accommodation. Churchill came to accommodation with Stalin, who were, the time that he came to accommodation, were murdering vast numbers of his and engaging in all kinds of brutality. I ain't saying we should turn a blind eye. I ain't saying that we shouldn't point the camera, but we've got to understand our raising human rights is not going to improve those human rights.
Okay. Right. Thank you all very much for that. We've got half an hour to take more of your questions. 0345 6060 973. You can phone or WhatsApp on that number. It's 8:30. Let's get the news headlines on LBC with Daryl Jackson.
Donald Trump has warned Iran time is running out to reach a deal over its nuclear program. The US president says a massive armada is heading to the Middle East following the steady buildup of US military forces in the Gulf. Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer has arrived in China for a 3-day visit, the first by a British Prime Minister in 8 years. Sir Keir is seeking to strengthen trading and cultural ties between the two countries. And the Scottish child abuse inquiries found physical, sexual and emotional abuse was allowed to take place for decades at Fettes College in Edinburgh. The failure to protect children from the 1950s to the 1980s has been described by the inquiry chair as shameful. LBC weather, increasingly cloudy conditions tonight with patchy rain and dense fog in eastern Scotland and England. Clearer and drier in the west, a low of -2.
This is LBC.
To be
Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
8:32 on LBC. Lord Eric Pickles is with us. Paul Richards, former Labour advisor. James Starkey, former Conservative advisor. And Suki Carlo from Big Brother Watch. Now, Matt in Burnley says, please may you ask the panel, very polite listeners, haven't we? Please may you ask the panel whether they think the rise of the Green Party and Reform will weaken the centre ground or strengthen it. Now, the early betting odds have put Reform as the favourite to win next month's Gorton by-election, but the Greens, who are yet to announce who their candidate will be, are second favourites, with most bookmakers ahead of Labour. James, have you been involved in by-elections in the dim and distant past?
Yeah, I've been up to camp. I've been down campaigning, canvassing, as you get sent out as a special advisor to go and help on them. I think it's an interesting one. I mean, there's this kind of focus on it. It looks almost easy for Reform or Greens to win. I was looking at the numbers earlier. I think Sarah Poachin only won by 6 votes, and so if you look, it's a different makeup in the constituency, but this could be really, 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 really close. And so I don't think it's impossible that Labour could actually hold it, but we'll see. And Matt Goodwin's a kind of I think he's the only candidate we know about. He's an interesting choice. He's not a local candidate, which is normally what you go for in a by-election. It's but
apparently he used to deliver pizzas in the area. So
I saw that. Yeah, I mean maybe that's
a winning strategy. I think
strong connection people are looking for, and we'll see who the other ones is. But I mean, we are now. If you look at the polling, we're in a kind of multi-party system. The local elections last year, and I suspect this year, will reflect that. It's looking like that in the devolves. This shows that it's a kind of even three-way marginals weren't that common a decade plus ago. I mean, they weren't unheard of, but they weren't that common. We've now got, if you look across the country, quite a lot of four-way marginals, and so I think it's going to be increasingly difficult to predict because you really are looking at who can turn their vote out, and I think candidates, whether if they're not local, and the interesting thing about someone like, not to go on about him, the interesting thing about Matt Goodwin is he's got a lot of stuff on the record. He's been in the media for about a decade. There'll be a lot of comments that the opposition.
That's not necessarily an advantage.
No, I wasn't suggesting it was definitely an advantage. There'll be things. So I think that kind of.
As I know to my cost.
Yes, I wasn't going to refer to that.
Eric Pickles, when you were chairman of the Conservative Party, you oversaw quite a few by-elections. But what about the question here about would if Reform or the Greens won this, would that damage the centre ground or strengthen it?
I mean, I was in charge of a by-election along with my friend Lord Gilbert, who now is. Was the first time the Conservatives won a by-election. So I know what it feels like.
Was that Crewe and Nantwich?
Crewe and Nantwich, yeah. And, we do all the crunching of the numbers and all this kind of thing. But in a way, those numbers just suddenly become like a river, and you can just see a change. And that change is something that you just can't stop. And it will be a question at that by-election of whether people can catch their imagination to persuade people to come out and vote. Now, people around this table are involved in politics and we all think it's fascinating. For most people, it isn't. So to motivate someone to actually come out on a Thursday evening in order to vote requires something that catches the imagination. Now, the straight answer to the question is, will it strengthen or weaken the centre ground? The answer is yes. It'll do one or the other. But what we know of all the elections that have taken
Get off
place,
that fence.
by and large, the extremes can't win. The extremes don't win. You have to move to a common ground. And that's kind of interesting that Kemi was talking about the common ground this morning. So it's not the centre ground. You need to build a coalition these days of people that want to see you elected. It doesn't work on wanting to stop people. They've got to like you.
Paul?
Well, I mean, bookmakers, for a start off, are pretty much the worst predictor of the outcomes of elections. This is wish fulfillment. It's people having a punt, going for the outside bet. But this is not a predictor of the future, as indeed is polling. I think I was in the Crewe by-election, and what struck me campaigning there all those years ago was that it felt like a very neglected seat that Labour hadn't really touched particularly, and we probably deserved the kicking that we got. And I suspect that might be a little bit like that in Denton and Gorton. I don't know, but Well, you will see.
I think it's Gorton and Denton, just to be.
Yes, fair enough. Well, I mean those two places. I wasn't talking about the seat, both of which I know well, by the way, because I went to Salford University like Matt Goodwin, so that means I'm as local as he is.
Perfect candidate.
I'm surprised I should have put myself forward. But Reform UK choosing Matt from London to fight this seat is an interesting one. Maybe they've given up. What you will see, Ian, though, seriously, is a Caerphilly-style tactical vote, I suspect, where the vote will coalesce around the Labour candidate to try and stop Reform from winning. And it'll be a straight fight where people just sort of hold their nose and vote for the Labour candidate, even though they're not Labour. And that's what you saw in Caerphilly recently, and I think you'll see the same again with this.
Eric, you're shaking your head.
No, I don't think that's how we do it at all. I think that's a conventional view. And forgive me, I won't sound rude.
Oh, you
but maybe you won't notice. The secret is to say, I know you're a Labour voter. You can still be a Labour voter, but lend us your vote. Give us a chance. Give us a chance to prove it. And if we're wrong, you can go back. And I think if Reform's smart, if the Greens are smart, that's what they're going to say. We want to send. They'll say something like this. We want to send a message to Keir Starmer. You're not going to change the government. This is actually a risk-free vote.
It's a free hit.
Yeah, vote for us. You might make a difference, and you might actually put some sense into Keir Starmer.
Well,
I don't mean this rudely at all.
No, of course, I understand. And that is often the shtick, isn't it, in a by-election? If only somebody had written a book about by-elections and we would know.
Well, indeed, yes. Who'd have thought? Silky.
I think the centre ground is increasingly vanishing in our politics, and people want radical change. They don't just want a bit of change. They don't want to see, a different brand of politician and the same kind of fit of politics. People actually want an overhaul. I get that sense that the public want very, very radical change, and the Greens and Reform purport to be offering that. I should say, well, I'm not a political party person at all, and Big Brother watches cross-party, non-party, but certainly you can see that appetite from the public. And what's interesting about choosing Matt Goodwin and potentially let's see who the Green candidate is, but you could say, obviously he's got a past, but you could say he's an internet personality to some degree. And I think it's interesting to see who is picking up the greatest support online and that kind of online politics playing out. Whether that will play out in a by-election and connect with people locally, I really, really question.
Well, let's bring another question into this, which is completely allied when we talk about the centre ground, because this is from Kai, who says, is Kemi Badenoch right to tell One Nation Tories like Andy Street and Ruth Davidson to get out of the way? Or is this a gift for Ed Davey's Liberal Democrats? Now, the Conservative leader says the Tory heavyweights behind the new centrist Prosper UK group, quotes, need to recognise the agenda which I'm setting, adding that pushing alternative agendas is not being helpful. So that kind of links into the last question, James.
I think Kemi is right. But I think the point she was making also is basically you need to pull in the same direction, and having all these different factions is not helpful. And I think that's, I think if Ruth and Andy Street have both been very successful, Ruth was very successful for Conservative Leader in Scotland. Andy was, I think, a brilliant West Midlands mayor. I think if they want to help Kemi campaign, that's great. I think if they want to set up a group that's kind of campaigning as a pressure group on her to move, I think that is incredibly unhelpful for where the Conservative Party is now.
But isn't the basic theme of what they're saying is that we do need to get people back from the Liberal Democrats, and we're not going to do that just by following a totally right-wing agenda. We've got to be more centrist to attract those people back.
I don't really understand what they mean by centrist. I read the interview that they did, and they talked about the importance of housing, something Lord Pickles knows is an expert on. They talked about the importance of getting people back into jobs in the economy. These are all things that Kemi's talking about. This is what Kemi talked about in her speech at the Conservative Party conference last year, and there's not disagreement on if they want to help the party come up with ideas for those, that's fine. There was a subtext in there, if you look, they really avoided questions of immigration, they really avoided a question on the ECHR, which will be a big question in the next general election, I suspect. And anything that shows disunity on that is going to be bad for the Conservative Party and is therefore not helpful to Kemi. She's been elected by the members to be able to get on with it.
Silky?
I mean, I think our politics is polarising massively. I mean, even the suggestion that there could be about how close the Lib Dems and the Conservatives now are, I think that's overplayed. Or at least there should be a massive gulf between the two parties, particularly for my interest on civil liberties. The Conservatives have been a part, successive governments that have brought in bills that are anti-protest, hostile to freedom of speech for all the rhetoric about it. I mean, responsible for the Online Safety Act, censorship, surveillance, and now trashing of the ECHR, which is the legacy of World War II, no less. Churchill's fingerprints all over it. I mean, So I think, there should be a massive difference between what people are voting for when they're going for Lib Dems or Tories.
Paul?
Well, I think successful political parties do not have a uniform view. They need that ferment of ideas, and I'm treasurer of the Fabian Society, so we would always argue that there's an agenda within the party we would push forward. I founded Progress with others in the 90s to sort of get the Blairite point of view across. So I think when people within the Conservative Party want to pursue an agenda through a faction or a platform or whatever you want to call it, I don't think it's right for the leader to then stamp that down. I think you do need that sort of plurality of ideas and the ferment of debate.
Like Keir Starmer has stamped it down in the Labour Party, getting rid of all the Corbynites.
They're people that perhaps shouldn't be in the Labour Party in the first place. I think that's different. They believe in a set of different values, I would argue. But we'd have that argument, Wes Streeting has said actually people in the campaign group should be in the Labour Party. So there's that debate to be had as well. But I think Kemi's been a bit heavy-handed, and the people that she's stamping down are sort of, I would think of as quite mainstream, grown-up, responsible members of the Conservative Party. People like Andy Street, obviously quite a successful politician. So why you would want to alienate those people and the voters they represent, I don't know.
Eric?
I'm sure we'll be able to find a rapprochement. But what people in various factions in the Tory party need to understand is you can't achieve anything unless you're in power. And it's all right being pure and absolutely right in opposition, but it's a pretty soul-destroying process. I mean, the past 50, 60 years, if you were to draw a Venn diagram and to include the policies of the various parties and their attitude, there would be a surprisingly large centre in which it all coincides. There wasn't that much difference between what Mr. Major wanted and Mr. Blair wanted. Obviously, Mr. Corbyn wanted something completely different. But I think those days are over now, and I think people are forming. The old certainties are gone. But Kemi has to bring us back. She has to bring us back in a big way. And I kind of understand why she's entirely focused on doing that, rather than listening to a bunch of people who want to argue the toss that this isn't exactly right. Well, a good, healthy party has different disagreements, but we have a leader. We elect her to get things going. And it's going to be difficult for her in May. It's going to be difficult for her to pull us out of the hole that we're in. But I'm pretty impressed with her so far. She's made more than a good fist of it, and I am reasonably optimistic for the medium to long term.
On that controversial bombshell, it's 8:46.
This is LBC. Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
8:49. Eric Pickles, Paul Richards, Suki Carlo and James Starkey with us answering your questions. Here's another one from Vass in Warwick. Is the current student loan system fair? Now, the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, has made this claim to LBC, arguing that only half of young people go to university, and therefore the half who don't shouldn't have to fund the studies of the rest. Try making that argument about other public services. Interesting one. But of course, the student loans interest rate is 3% above RPI, not CPI, which means that a lot of students are effectively, they're paying what they have to, but at the end of the year, they owe more than they did at the beginning of the year, which surely can't be fair. We're going to be talking about this after 9, by the way, so if you've got strong views, do give us a call. Eric, let's start with you.
Well, people are now caught in a very peculiar trap, where if they take an increase in salary at work, they find themselves having to pay more back. That's not a good place for it to be in. I think it would be sensible to have a look, and this was never the intention, so I think it would make sense to have a long, hard look at it. I think the logic of saying only certain people have student loans up, and they have to pay for it is a bit weird, considering all the other services that are available. I happily pay out for the health service and don't use it that often, and I recognise it's part of your social duty but one thing I would be very keen on, and every government pays lip service to this, is I'd be really keen for us to move on apprenticeships. You know, I used to represent Brentwood. At that time, it used to have Fords in. You'd see people come across from Germany, doctors of engineering, immensely proud. I went to Eindhoven, and they've got a technical college there, and the town's so proud of it. And we never seem to be able to express pride in apprenticeships in a way that's possible right across the continent, and it will make one heck of a difference, I think, to our society. But the short answer is yes, I think we need to look at it, and we need to restructure it, and we need to try and make it in such a way that people don't find themselves paying marginal rates.
Silky.
I think it's terribly unfair. I was at university, I started in 2009, so I was part of the group of students who fought tooth and nail against the tripling of tuition fees. And you remember the big protests we had in 2010 and so on. And for me, it was personal as well, because I'm from a working class background. I was really not sure. I mean, luckily for me, I got to Cambridge. I thought it was worth it going, and also thanks to the Newton Trust and the Winston Churchill Memorial Trust, I was able to do it. But without that financial support, as well as the loans, I literally don't think I would have been able to do it. And I think that we do have high numbers of people going to university, but they're coming out with crippling debt, and we wonder why young people are depressed and anxious. Well, the average graduate salary is between 40 and 45k. The average loan amount that students are coming out with is over £50,000. And so you are simply servicing growing debt that will have to be written off after 30, 40 years. It's a completely broken system. It doesn't work. One of the things I think the government should look at is trying to address the skills shortages that we have in the country by writing off some student loans. For example, if you're training as a doctor, and doctors are going to come out with possibly 90k student debt, ludicrous. If you train as a doctor and you serve in the NHS for, say, 5-10 years, what about the government writing off your student loan? And that would help deal with our reliance on overseas work, as well as encouraging people from all kinds of backgrounds into professions that we need them to work in.
Paul.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting idea, actually, how you incentivise people staying here and avoiding the brain drain. I think the public policy function of the loan system was to increase access to university. When I went 10%, 1 in 10 of my cohort went to university. Now it's about 50%. So the idea was to get more kids into university. That's a good thing. However, the policy outcome of where we are now with people with these ridiculous debts that just go up, it obviously it's an unintended consequence, and it does need to be tackled, I think, in some creative ways, as Silky was suggesting. Echoing Eric's point, though, you know, we we still have a system that sees university good, apprenticeships bad, or second best, or somehow not quite as valid. And we've got to end that. We've got to say that apprenticeships are as good, if not better. And degree apprenticeships you get paid and you learn at the same time. So you don't get a debt, but you get money in your pocket. So more kids should be doing that.
Politicians from all parties over the last 10 years have been extolling the virtues of apprenticeships, but still there is, I think you're right, this idea that, well, if you haven't gone to university, you're a bit of a failure.
It's a very British idea too, as you were saying, in Germany and elsewhere all over the world. It's seen as valid, if more so. And yet it's the class system in the UK. It's the class system says if you go to university, you've been successful, and if you haven't, you're not.
James?
I just want to make a brief point, which is we talked about the centre ground going, people going to extremes. Well, if you have a load of kids coming into a society where they're saddled with huge amounts of debt, they're never going to pay off, and they can't afford a house, why would they vote for the system that's there? We are creating now a group of people who, by definition, don't have anything invested in the system and will keep going to the extremes. So it's actually crucial to the kind of stability of our society and politics that we do because it's clearly broken at the moment.
Right, this next question is right up Silky Street. Thomas in Bristol says the government wants to massively ramp up the police's use of AI and facial recognition. Is this really safe, though? Silky.
I don't know. How could anyone not get a massive chill down the spine when they read Shabana Mahmood's comments on the weekend that she envisages a panopticon for this country?
A what?
Panopticon. A panopticon.
Okay.
A surveillance-orientated prison. The idea, the structure was, the idea of a panopticon is that you could...
Bentham, right?
It's Bentham.
Yeah.
That you could organise a prison and have people police themselves by having total surveillance. She was talking about that, the idea of a self-policing prison through total surveillance as the model for Great Britain. She said that she had this vision of the eyes of the state being on people at all times. And as part of that she envisages ramping up facial recognition up and down the country, 5 times as many facial recognition cameras up and down the country. Today, I was in the High Court challenging the Metropolitan Police's use of live facial recognition, which I think is expansive and not in accordance with the law. But this is really it's an issue for the courts to consider, but ultimately it's an issue for Parliament. And we haven't had a debate about facial recognition in Parliament. I really, really hope that we don't blindly sleepwalk into that kind of surveillance state nightmare. And we've got to have a greater sensitivity about this in our politics, because that really is the stuff of dystopian nightmares. And then we've got, Starmer in China, and we are losing moral authority on some of these issues as well. But I don't think that is not the kind of country any of us want to live in.
And how much does it cost to join Big Brother Watch?
Well, for you it could be free.
Oh, really?
Absolutely no joining cost. No joining cost, but people support us with monthly donations from as little as £3 a month. It helps us do the vital work that we do.
Okay, right. 45 seconds each of the rest of you. James.
Well, I think there's a balance to be struck. I agree with what some of Silky said, but I also think in law enforcement, there's places like crowd control, football games and so on, where there's people that are going to cause trouble. I think you'd be crazy not to use technology as it develops to help the police do that. I think for me, transparency is key. Transparency around all these things is normally what washes things away. You're right, there should be accountability to Parliament and we should know what the police are doing, but they should absolutely be using new technology to help them better do their jobs.
Paul?
Well, I agree with that. I think the technology will only get better and better, and some of the concerns around facial recognition, the way it profiles certain groups and so on, will be ironed out by the tech, and it will save the taxpayer a lot of money to be able to do this through technology. We had the same debate in the Victorian era about fingerprints, didn't we? And they were supposed to be a terrible imposition on the rights of the individual, but we're perfectly accepting of fingerprints now as a crime prevention and a crime detection, as we will, I think, in a few years with the facial recognition.
I mean, this is light years away from fingerprints, but be honest. And we have laws that govern fingerprints. You can't have the police come up and just swipe fingerprints from everyone and anyone all the time, but we all walk past facial recognition cameras and they take digital identity checks on us without us even knowing about it. You can't defend it.
But you don't know about it because
it catches criminals.
Exactly, the criminals know about it because they're the ones then taken off the street. If they're being pursued. But if you've done nothing wrong, you've got nothing to fear from it.
No.
That's right. Let's hear from Eric.
But I think people will be rather happy. Fairly soon you'll be able to go to Heathrow and just walk through without having to show your customs through facial recognition. It'll reduce all the queues. So there's an upside to all this.
Well, it happens on e-gates anyway, doesn't it?
Yeah, but you wouldn't need to have to put the actual passport in. It would already recognise you from an existing passport. So, you are not alone.
Do you want border staff security on the high streets, just in everyday life?
Oh, don't get aggressive with me. I was just making a contribution here, that's all.
Question for you, Eric. Yvonne in Hastings says, reference Eric Pickles, is he related to the judge?
No, the judge is related to Wilfred Pickles, and the judge is the father of that wonderful actress Caroline Pickles, though I did know Jimmy Pickles when I was in the north of England.
Well,
really
there's more information than we needed, but thank you very much indeed. Right, our fun question is, where's it gone? Here we are. It's from Martha in Streatham. A bakery in the Highlands has created the largest ever Empire biscuit in a 78-inch wide tin. If you had to make one stupidly large biscuit, which one would it be, James?
Definitely a cookie. I used to get those big cookies for my birthday when I was in my teens. So I'd have the biggest cookie that you could get, I think.
Sophie?
Chocolate-coated digestive.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Dark chocolate.
Dark chocolate, yeah. 100%.
Paul?
Well, as you know, Ian, I don't eat sugar, so I can't eat a biscuit and it's got no sugar in it, and then who wants to eat that? Nobody.
Eric?
When we looked like we were going to take control, win the election in 2010, the press were desperate to say, are you going to be supping champagne? And I got this line and said, no, I might have a cup of Earl Grey and a jammy dodger. But I have to tell the world, I do not like jammy Johnsons. If I had to have a biscuit, it would be a nice digestive.
Yeah, you can't. I actually had a couple of digestives the other day, and I hadn't had them for like 10 years. I thought, this is actually the real thing. Thank you all very much. Now, tomorrow, you're going to have to pin your ears back at 8 o'clock on tomorrow's Cross Question, because Corey and Chris have created, I won't say the panel from hell, but it's a specially US-themed panel. Here are the guests. Bernie Sanders' brother, Larry Sanders, Jennifer Ewing from Republicans Overseas UK, the Democrats Abroad UK campaigner Jamie Klingler, plus the experienced American journalist and broadcaster Tom Rivers. I'm going to have a nightmare of a job keeping that lot together. I mean, seriously. Anyway, it'll be fun. Next, we're going to talk about student loans and particularly interest rates. Is the student loan system fair? Do you have strong views on it? What would you replace it with? Why is the interest rate so high?
On your radio, on the LBC app, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, a minister in Tehran says Iran's armed forces have their fingers on the trigger to immediately respond to any aggression after threats from America. US President Donald Trump says a massive armada of US ships is on its way to the Middle East unless a deal is reached over Iran's nuclear program. Dr. Arash Azizi is an Iranian-American historian and writer. He's told LBC Donald Trump isn't set on military action.
I think he prefers some sort of a deal, but he wants a real deal. He wants the regime to give up so much, and if they don't do it, I think he will take action. He's trigger happy when he needs to be. So I think it's quite likely that we'll have some sort of an action, unless the regime is really able to take some drastic action, to some deal making, which I don't really see.
Sir Keir Starmer's told business delegates they are making history as he kicked off his trip to China. It's the first time a Prime Minister has travelled to Beijing since Theresa May in 2018. A danger-to-life flood warning's been reimposed in Dorset after Storm Chandra. Residents at a home park by the River Stour near Christchurch have been told to leave as quickly as possible. A lorry driver died yesterday in a weather-related crash in the New Forest. The Chancellor's told LBC the current student loan system is fair, despite a former Deputy Prime Minister warning it needs an overhaul. Sir Nick Clegg says it's worth considering to tackle levels of graduate debt amid concerns it's spiralling. Rachel Reeves insists people only pay it back when they can afford to do so.
So if you are able to get a job that pays a good wage, you'll pay that money back quicker. But if you're never able to repay, that loan will eventually be written off. I think that is a fair system. Around half of people go to university today, but half don't. And it is not right that people who don't go to university are having to bear all the cost for others to do so.
And more than 1,100 jobs are at risk after the original factory shop fell into administration. All of its 137 stores, which sell clothing and homeware at a discount, could close. In the city, the FTSE 100s closed down 53 points at 10,154. The pound buys $1.37 and €1.15. LBC weather, increasingly cloudy conditions tonight with patchy rain and dense fog in eastern Scotland and England. Clearer and drier in the west, a low of -2. From Global's newsroom, for LBC, I'm Daryl Jackson.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with Iain Dale.
4 minutes past 9. Very good evening. Do you have a student loan? Do your children have a student loan? Do your grandchildren have a student loan? Because if so, you're going to be interested in this next hour, because I'm fairly convinced that if student loans had existed when I went to university in 1981, that I probably wouldn't have gone. And yet, you look at the statistics since student loans were introduced by the Tony Blair government in, was it 1999? Something like that. And they were $3,000, maximum $3,000 a year at that point. The participation rate in higher education has mushroomed. I mean, when I went to university, 17% of 18-year-olds went to university. It's now around 50% and has been for some time. Now, you can take the view that, well, 50% is too much, that not everybody should go to university. A lot of people who do go to university end up dropping out after a term or after their first year because it's just not right for them. And I think there is something in that university is not appropriate for everybody. But if you've done that, you've incurred debts now of over £9,000 because the tuition fees were trebled under the coalition government. Obviously, that caused huge headaches for the Liberal Democrats who had promised to abolish them. But we effectively have a system now where if you are doing any sort of graduate degree, for example, you can end up with debts of £40,000, £50,000, £60,000. If you're doing a medical degree over 7 years or something, it can be £80,000, £90,000, £100,000. Well, no normal person wants to incur debts of that amount. But the system that the successive governments have come up with for repayment of student loans is one of the maddest, I think, that any government could actually have ever thought of. And this is where I think politicians in the end are to blame because the buck stops with them. But how they could have allowed a situation to develop where, and certainly I think this was the case in the first few years of the student loan scheme, where even if you got a really well-paid job going straight from university and you were earning, say, £150,000 a year, I'm not sure many people would, you weren't actually allowed to pay off your student loan because it would have been unfair to poorer students. Now, that has changed. But what hasn't changed is the extortionate amount of interest that students are paying on these loans. It's absolutely ridiculous that the interest rate on student loans is it's around 7% at the moment, I think. So that's higher than you would bet. I mean, the basic interest rate now, the bank rate is somewhere between 3% and 4%. So students are having to pay much more than that. And it can mean, I was listening to Andrew Marr talking about this earlier, and he was interviewing somebody who essentially said that he's paying back, the money that he's paying back through his student loan means that at the end of the year, he owes more than he did at the beginning of the year. Now, that is the economics of the madhouse. And as James Starkey was saying in Cross Question a moment ago, if you get to a point where you totally lose confidence in the student loan system, you totally lose confidence in basically any system, you lose total confidence in capitalism, you have no prospect of saving for a deposit for your first home because you're paying back huge amounts of your student loan. I mean, don't be surprised if people then lose confidence in the whole political system. And therefore, they opt out of it. They don't vote. So we've madly created a system which didn't need to be created. There are so many other ways of funding student university degrees. There could have been a very simple graduate tax, for example. And the fact is that a high percentage of these student loans will never, ever be repaid. They will have to be written off. And successive governments are basically fiddling the nation's books to try and hide this on the nation's balance sheet. It is mad, isn't it? But I want to hear from you. How is this affecting you or your children or your grandchildren in their everyday lives? 0345 6060 973. Excuse me. Well, let's hear what the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, told Natasha Clark, our political editor, last night.
It is important that you don't have to start paying back the student loan until you earn enough money. And that is the point of the student loan system, that you get the loan, you get that great university education, and you only pay it back if you can afford to do so. And obviously after a period of time, that gets written off entirely. So if you are able to get a job that pays a good wage, you'll pay that money back quicker. But if you're never able to repay, that loan will eventually be written off. I think that is the fair system. Around half of people go to university today, but half don't. And it is not right that people who don't go to university are having to bear all the cost for others to do so.
And earlier this evening, Cameron Smith, who's a social media influencer focused on personal finance education, spoke to my colleague Andrew Marr and explained how the amount he owes on his student loan has spiralled out of control.
I did a 4-year master's degree in electronic engineering. It cost me, I needed to borrow £55,000 in student debt in order to pay for this education through tuition fees and maintenance loans. But what 17-year-old me didn't quite realise, what maybe perhaps wasn't quite explained to me, maybe I should have read a bit deeper into it, is that the interest is applied from the moment your student loan repayments are given to you. So while I was at university, my loan actually increased £12,000 in interest. So I left university with a £67,000 student debt. I then start making repayments, obviously interest still being applied. And over the last 3 and a bit years, I've made almost £10,000 in repayments. But despite this, my loan has increased in £20,000 in interest. So it's now at £75,000.
That is just barking mad, isn't it? And yet government ministers say this system is absolutely fair. I think a lot of students who voted Labour at the last election actually thought that something would be done about this, and they've been very badly let down. The previous government, frankly, should have done something about it, but did not. Well, Tom Allingham joins us from the student money-focused website Save the Student. Tom, I feel quite outraged about this. Goodness knows only how you feel.
Yeah, a lot of people are very, very angry about this. I should say as well, kind of full disclosure, I was in that first cohort of students on the Plan 2 loan, which came in 2012 when tuition fees trebled. So like your contributor that we just heard, when I studied, I took out a loan to the value of just over £48,000. When I was at university, the full rate of interest is applied, which was a whole big issue in itself, that you get charged the full RPI plus 3% whilst you're at university. So just from that, I gained an additional £6,000 of interest. And in the time since then, having graduated with a debt of £54,000, my debt is now just over £73,000. So in the time since graduating university just over 10 years ago, my debt has grown by £20,000, despite the fact that in the interim period, I have largely always been earning enough to be making repayments.
And how does it work? I mean, if you suddenly decided to have a career change and got a job that was paying you, say, $200,000 a year or something, do they accept sort of full repayment in one go if you wanted to do that? Because I don't think they did initially.
They do, yeah. I mean, if I was earning 200 grand a year, then maybe it would be financially sensible for me to do so. I should say that unless you are very, very sure that you're going to repay your loan in full well before that 30-year cutoff, it's generally not advisable for you to pay it off early because, well, A, you might not have to pay it off at all, but B, even if you have that lump sum of money, it might be better put towards, for example, a mortgage or other forms of debt that you have available.
The fact that the interest rate is 3% above RPI, I mean, most things are calculated on CPI, aren't they? So what is their justification for using RPI?
I have to be totally honest and say I don't know what their justification is. I've heard anecdotally people speculate that the government likes to use RPI when it lends money out and it likes to use CPI when it borrows itself, because you say RPI is generally about a percentage point higher than CPI. And I think most economists broadly disregard RPI as a measure of inflation. So I think that's one of many bones that people have to pick with the system.
Now, you and I could sit here for the next hour just whinging and complaining and saying that it's all awful and something needs to be done. What needs to be done? Because nobody seems to have come up with an alternative solution apart from just saying, well, let's have a graduate tax. Now, in a sense, this is a graduate tax, but if you related it to just the sort of income tax system, surely that would be less bureaucratic and cheaper to run, and therefore you wouldn't have to charge such extortionate interest rates.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think a graduate tax has a lot of selling points to it, not least the fact that it kind of gets rid of that confusion of the current system where it's a bit of a mishmash between a loan and a tax, because obviously the very highest earners can pay it off in full quite early. And actually also the people from the richest backgrounds never have to take out a loan in the first place. So introducing a flat graduate tax across all people who have been to university would, in a lot of cases, probably reduce lifetime repayments, but also increase repayments for the very highest earners and those people who never took out a loan in the first place. So it would, in terms of social mobility, equal things out a little bit. In kind of broader solutions to a student loan system, number one, we would like the repayment threshold to increase annually in line with earnings. This was promised by the government when the system was introduced. That hasn't happened. And in a few years, it was interesting to hear Rachel Reeves say that you only have to start repaying when you start earning a decent salary. Well, given the freeze to the repayment threshold that was announced in the budget for 3 years, and the fact that we're getting increases to the minimum wage as well, it's not going to be long before a full-time minimum wage worker is having to make student loan repayments, which makes absolutely no sense to me. And on the interest rate, I think there are honestly so many changes that can be made. Number one, I think that CPI change that you mentioned is number one on the list, but also the additional up to 3% interest rate. If you're going to have that as part of the system, at least charge it to actual high earners, not low and middle earners too.
Have you had a sit down with the university's minister, my old friend Jackie Smith, on this?
I haven't. No, I would love to. And if she's listening,
well, I might try and facilitate that, because I do think this is an absolute outrage. And I mean, I don't know what percentage of students voted Labour at the last election, but I suspect it was a pretty high percentage. And if they want to get those votes at the next election, surely they need to address this.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think it's actually quite interesting that in the build up to the election, Bridget Phillipson, the now Education Secretary, she strongly alluded to, and in fact, at one point earlier than the kind of build up to the election, she wrote an article where she said graduates would repay less under a Labour government. And in the build up to the election, made strong allusions to a system that has been modelled by London economics, where essentially it would work on a stepped system similar to income tax. So on a lower proportion or lower kind of range of your income, you'd repay a smaller percentage. So let's say from 15 to 20 grand, you'd pay 2%. On a higher amount, you pay 4%, higher amount 6%, higher amount 8%, as income tax works. This has been modelled to calculate that graduates, but not a single graduate rather, would pay any more than their current repayments, and it would come at little to no cost to the Treasury. As I say, Bridget Phillipson made noises to suggest that not only was she aware of this, but she was keen on it too. Since the election, we've heard absolutely nothing about this. And I think, again, it's things like this that you just kind of ask, why aren't they doing something?
See, I'm sitting here mulling over the fact, why haven't the big banks come up with schemes where they could sell a student loan at the age of 18 with a much more favourable interest rate than 7%, and that they would obviously be taking the commercial risk on it, but I would have thought there was a market opportunity there.
I mean, there have been private lenders in the student space in the past. What I would say, though, is that despite all of its many flaws, and there are many of them, the big selling point of a student loan, aside from, well, A, it doesn't affect your interest, so your credit rating rather. So there are ways in which it can affect your ability to get a mortgage in terms of the affordability rating, but it doesn't affect your credit rating. So that's one big selling point that you wouldn't get with a bank loan. The other thing, though, is that repayment threshold that, we want it to be higher. It should be increasing annually in line with earnings. But the fact of the matter is, if you do lose your job or your earnings do fall below it, you stop repaying, no obligation. With a bank loan, unfortunately, that wouldn't be the case. So as I say, private lenders have entered the student space in the past, but it's not something I would generally advise.
Thank you very much, Tom, for speaking to us. That's Tom Allingham from the website Save the Student. Look, politicians are elected to solve problems, to come up with solutions. And it beggars belief to me that in the last 15 years, the system has not changed. The system of interest rates hasn't changed. And so generations of students are growing up with these ridiculous level of debts. It's unsustainable, isn't it? So the question I've got for you is, I want to know how student loans have affected you or your children, and what alternative system would you suggest that the government should deploy? Because we know that there are huge problems in our university system. The student loan system is just one of those problems. Nobody's realistically ever going to be able to abolish student loans, because if they did, we'd have to cut the number of university students probably back from 50% to 20%. Now, some of you may think that would be a good idea. I'm not sure it would be a majority view. Should we really have a system where there should even be maximums on student loans? Because many universities think it's an outrage that the government puts a cap on what they can charge. 0345 6060 973. You're listening to LBC. It's 19 minutes past 9.
This is LBC.
Quick question.
Iain Dale. Call 0345 6060 973. Text 84850. Alexa, send a comment to LBC.
21 minutes past 9. This is from Hope, who says, I went to uni in 2009. At school, we were told that we wouldn't get a job unless we got a degree. I've never used my degree, and I'm still paying it back. I'll get written off in 2038 for me. At one point, I only paid off about £8 of my loan in 1 year due to the interest rates. You see, that is where, how can anyone have confidence in a system where that is allowed to be the case? It is absolutely ridiculous. Nick in Weybridge says there is no world in which people making a genuine attempt to pay back debt, any debt, should be worse off at the end of 12 months. The debt has to reduce. No argument. Well, it sounds so simple, doesn't it? And it ought to be simple, because if we were having a phone-in about outrageous interest rates on credit cards, where effectively you're in the same position, that you can almost never pay off the debt because of the level of interest, even if you meet the minimum repayment every month. People will be outraged by that. And yet this is state-sponsored larceny. Sebastian is in Harrow. Hello, Sebastian.
Hi, Ian. It's great to speak with you. I did have a couple of points, and it really riled me up when I'm thinking about this student debt and how horrible it is. For one thing, the idea that I was musing in my head was basically that if you knew that you were going to go to university and get a university education, you could have the government have an ISA kind of scheme, like independent savings account kind of stuff, where you would be able to save money towards your fees ahead of time, so that when you actually do get to the point where you wanted to go to apply for university, you've got a big lump sum ready and waiting to actually pay any of the fees that you wanted. You could get the government to structure the fees per year, so that you could be saving at the same time as actually paying it off at the end of the year or the beginning of the next term, and have have the sums due termly as opposed to annually ahead of time. There's so many different things you could do to do that, but of course it doesn't help the people who are currently already in that situation. And for that reason, what you would probably want to do is something that Jeremy Corbyn suggested was, he said, wipe out all the debt.
Oh, well, it's so easy, isn't it?
Yeah, but you know, you can't do that. But I can realise that. But at least you could have some kind of scheme where they do reduce the debt per people. And this interest rate is absolutely mad. I mean, this is the first thing that the government should have addressed, and they should have looked at a long time ago. As I understood it, the interest rate was supposed to be a couple of percent, and that was fixed, and that was throughout your loan. And then it got tiered for some reason, and it made a big jump up to 6% or something. And I thought, well, okay, at least it's fixed. But now it's like rising every year. It's linked to an index, which is obviously going to keep going up, and that is as you said, larceny. And for that, the immediate effect should be immediate. I mean, tomorrow, the government should say, whoever's charging whatever interest it is, it needs to be 2%, and that's for everybody across the board, and that's all they can. And all their loans are reevaluated to that, and the government picks up pieces because that's how they promised it. They promised it in such a way that you would not be, hard done by getting this loan. We never take loans in our family. I mean, for the last 30 years, I've never had a loan. But when my son went into uni to Hull, we had his fees ready beforehand, and we paid everything up front, and his accommodation, everything. We just sorted that out for him. So, and then the same for my daughter, but then her fees were like triple, i.e. 9,000. But we did the same thing for her. So she's not in any kind of debt for her education, and neither is my son, and they can just get on with, their normal lives. So I mean, I really, really feel sympathy for those people who are actually stuck with these massive debts, and all they can hope for is 30 years comes by, and only then they can actually start to earn a lot of money. Or what do they do? I mean, you automatically get a pay rise. You say, well, actually, I don't want the pay rise. Otherwise I'll have to pay my debt off. I mean, what kind of ridiculous world are we living in?
There's another consequence to this, isn't there? Because all of the people who are currently paying off their student loans, or think they're paying them off, but actually they're increasing every year because of the interest rate, they are probably going to be pretty reluctant to advise their own children when they have them to go to university, because they won't want them to have the same level of debts that they've incurred.
Well, exactly. The vice chancellors need to think this through, and think that where is their future project incumbents going to come from if the current people who are going to have children in the future, your universities are going to be like completely stuffed. They won't be able to get any fees, and the chancellor's pay is something like £400,000 a year.
Yep.
And it wouldn't have been that if you didn't have these fees. I mean, they would have been on normal kind of salaries. And I just can't get my head around what, they're basically writing their own checks.
Well, believe it or not, and I think I've got this right. I read it in an article in The Spectator, so it must be true. Cambridge University now doesn't just have one vice-chancellor, they have 5. Now, I haven't got their salaries to hand, but they're not going to be they're all going to be medium six figures, I would think.
I would imagine, and all this is coming from the fees. And there's near where we are, there's Imperial College, there's various other universities around here, and you can see the massive tall story buildings they've got, like 20, 30-story blocks, all around the whole uni for the new students. And literally they've put all that money in because they know they're going to get them from fees. Yeah. And then the lectures that they're giving, they're not that high-quality lectures, i.e. they're given material, you can work from home, you hardly have to attend any lessons. What are the lecturers doing then? They're just preparing the lessons for the next time. And on the odd occasion, somebody who's got a question, they might ring them up and ask if they're that way inclined. Otherwise, they're just studying on their own anyway. So what the point is, what are these fees being used for? Other than investment in property, maybe? Paying high salaries?
Well, I think each university is in a very different position, and look, we do have world-leading universities. Let's not sort of be too hard on ourselves. We've got 3 out of the world top 10. I think we've got 7 out of the world's top 30. So all in all, we don't do a bad job. However, there are plenty of academic institutions in this country, not just universities, but others too, who are not pulling their weight.
But yes, you're right. There's so many, and you'd probably find newer establishments coming across too. But this whole education malarkey has to be sorted out. Like I said before, my kids are out of it. They don't need to consider that. But I've got a grandchild that's just had recently, and I'm thinking about their generation, how they're going to fare with this. But my kids saw what we did for them, and they're saving ahead of time. For their kids' educations in the same kind of way. But it's scary because, the costs are so high, property values are skyrocketed, and, where do they go? I mean, they seem quite confident in their jobs and so on, but, it's just a click away and you could lose it. So it's really, really hard, and that's why I feel really, really upset that the government, in their power, they can do anything. They can have wars, they can, run up debts for COVID. They can pay businesses whatever at the stroke of a pen. They can say, okay, I'll tell you what, we're going to give you £1,600 a year off your bills if you're a pub. They can do that. Right? They have the power to do stuff like that.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Why don't they apply their brains to this kind of thing that's really going to help society?
Sebastian, thank you very much indeed. Now, there are, these are the facts about the University of Cambridge. There are 5 pro-vice-chancellors at the University of Cambridge. Their role is to work in partnership with senior administrators to help drive strategy and policy development. The pro-vice-chancellors also support the vice-chancellor in providing academic leadership in the university. So they're essentially deputies to the vice-chancellor, and there's only one of those. And the vice-chancellor was paid a salary of over £400,000 in 2024. So it's reasonable to assume that these pro-vice-chancellors are paid somewhere, I would estimate, we haven't got the figures, somewhere in excess of £250,000. It's a reasonable assumption to make, isn't it? Nice money if you can get it. Right, we'll take more of your calls in a moment. What's been your experience with student loans? How do you think the system could be reformed to make it fairer? And if you have come out of university owing £40,000, £50,000, £60,000, would you advise your children in future to actually go to university? 0345 6060 973. It's 9:32 news headlines on LBC with Daryl Jackson.
Iran says it will defend itself if pushed, but is ready to discuss its nuclear program with the US. Donald Trump has warned a massive US naval force is headed for the Middle East and time is running out for a deal. At least 2 federal agents involved in the death of US citizen Alex Pretty in Minneapolis on Saturday have been suspended. US media says they were put on leave as part of standard procedures. And a danger to life flood warnings being issued in Dorset after Storm Chandra brought heavy rain and strong winds. Homes have been evacuated near Christchurch and a lorry driver died in a weather-related crash in the New Forest in Hampshire. LBC weather, increasingly cloudy conditions tonight and patchy rain and dense fog in eastern Scotland and England. Clearer and drier in the west, a low of -2.
Weekdays from 7 a.m.
They have fatal incompetence.
Straight to the point.
What is the problem they've got over there?
Nick Ferrari at breakfast on LBC.
The country's going backwards. Growth down. Energy prices up.
Listen on our free Global Player app or the new LBC app. Download it now from your app store. LBC.
To be
Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
9:35 on LBC. We're talking about student loans. David says, isn't it disingenuous for people to say fewer people should go to university? Their parents want them to go. The university towns and cities want them to move to the towns and cities because they spend money and contribute huge sums towards the local economy. 0345 6060 973. Can you think of a different way that the student loan system could work? Let's exclude abolishing student loans, because I mean that is just unrealistic. You could not put that entire burden now back onto the taxpayer. And you might say, well, it's easy for you to say that because when you went to university, there were no student loans and no tuition fees. And yeah, you're absolutely right. In fact, not only that, I would get a grant from Essex County Council. It wasn't a massive amount, but it paid for my accommodation. Let's go to Kate, who's in Amersham. Hi, Kate.
Hi there. I just wanted to share my experience. I don't, for my children, I don't actually have any answers, unfortunately, yet. But I have three children, adult children now, 28, 26 and 22. We're a family who massively believe in education as a way forward and a way to be successful and get a good job in life. When my children took out their student loans, we had no idea of the interest rates that were going to come down the line. And consequently, my son, who is 28, moved to Australia with his girlfriend, who also has a university degree. My son went to Oxford. His girlfriend went to St Andrews. They've moved to Australia 2.5 years ago and don't have any plans on coming back here. I'd say largely because of the student loan, not entirely, but largely because of it.
Are you saying that because they've moved to Australia, they don't have to repay it?
Well, apparently, if they live outside of the UK, my understanding is they live outside the UK, they don't have to repay it.
That's outrageous.
I could be wrong, but I'm led to believe. My second daughter, maybe I'm wrong, but my second child, she moved in November to Australia for the same, because she ended up doing my son did 4 years because he had to do a foundation year. My daughter did 5 years for personal reasons. She changed courses and then had a problem in another year, but she ended up doing 5 years. And my youngest daughter, who's 22, who still lives with me, is about to finish criminology and psychology in May of this year and is planning to leave the country at the end of the year. None of them plan on coming back. And all I can say from that is I was lucky enough to go out to Australia at Christmas and we all spent time together because I hadn't seen my son for 2.5 years. It was heartbreaking as a mother to leave my children, two of my children, nearly 3, on the other side of the world and not know if I will have a future with them, will have grandchildren I'll be able to see regularly, because the cost and the distance is massive and it's absolutely heartbreaking. But it's largely down to, it's not entirely, but it is a large part of it, is how the student loan has, and obviously the cost of living and buying houses and everything is just so difficult.
Well, we've just looked into this, and if they believe that they can escape the student loan by moving overseas, I'm afraid they're sadly mistaken.
Oh, that might be my mistake rather than theirs. But I thought that was they kind of have indicated that, though.
Well,
is that a mistake?
I would do a little bit of research on this if I were them, because if they ever plan to come back to this country, they're going to face a very, very large bill indeed.
No, but that is the thing; they don't plan to come back.
Well, circumstances.
Yeah, they don't plan to come back.
I mean, in the awful event, Kate, that you
that's an enormous amount of money.
But I mean, I obviously hope this doesn't happen. But if you fell really ill, and one of them decided that they would do the thing that a child ought to do and come back and look after you, well, they would be liable for a very large sum of money.
Yeah, but I can't see any of them doing that. I wouldn't ask them to do it.
Well,
I wouldn't ask them to do that for financial reasons, but
it does. It's because I mean, if it were true that they could escape it, I mean, you would essentially have an international student system where Australian students would move to this country to escape their own student loans there. I mean, that would be utterly ridiculous, wouldn't it?
But do they not? it's a genuine question. Do they have to pay it back if they're earning enough money in a foreign country that's outside of UK jurisdiction?
Yes.
They do. I'm not saying they would do anything, and I would not encourage them to do anything that is wrong, but I thought you had to be in the UK earning money as a taxpayer in the UK to repay.
Not according to Chris, who's been researching this while you've been talking.
Okay.
So,
okay, I could be wrong, but I do believe that the reasons that they're abroad is largely because they're.
I mean, obviously, if you work abroad, the UK government can't take the money out of your earnings automatically, but it is up to you to repay that money.
Right.
That's apparently how it works. Or maybe it doesn't.
Oh.
All right, Kate, thank you very much indeed. Sully says, my 3 kids all got good degrees and got a career job soon after graduation. None earned over £35,000 in the first or second year. They all had to move to the big cities. Luckily, they had friends through networking in uni and through family, so they sofa surfed in the first year to save up rent and deposit money, etc. My last one is still a sofa surfer, but is saving up well. I like the idea of the guest, a graduate tax, so only students pay. Let's go to Karen, who's in Wokingham. Hello, Karen.
Oh, hi there.
Hi.
Thank you for taking my call. No, I listen to you a lot anyway, but I was just incensed, really, this debacle, really. So my older son is just in his final year at uni. But it's now 40 years that the government has changed it where the debt is repaid over. I'm sure it's 40 now. It's gone up even more, but everyone seems to keep saying it's 30 and it used to be 25. It's definitely 40, I'm sure. So I don't know whether it's worth just checking that because it's even worse. And we've had to make a decision. So, I'm a bit older now, but I'm still working full time just to make sure that he can actually go through this educational piece at university. And then I've got a younger son now who's just doing his A-levels, and how can I not offer the same, opportunity? When you've got all these MPs sitting in Parliament, most of them, that had a free degree education, and then you look at Scotland, they get actually free, don't they, university places. So it just feels very much so down south, we're really penalised big time. And I really feel for any students now that are at university, unless you've got rich parents or grandparents, then, you're going to struggle. And that debt, I come from a banking and finance background and I do mortgages. And although it may not be taken, it does get taken into account because it's out of your disposable income. So if you're earning, even over whatever it is now, is it 26,000 or something ridiculous, and you're paying hundreds of pounds back, I see it all the time. You've got a couple, literally, boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife, in their late 20s, and they're paying some of them £500-600 a month back. They're still only earning 30,000 a year each. That's a hell of a lot of money out of their income every month. And it's definitely over 40 years. So for the whole of my son's working life, not that I expect charity, but he will be paying. And please God, he'll get a good job. But it's not right. I just think it's too much. And the way that the interest is calculated on the debt is a disgrace. Absolute disgrace.
But it just goes to prove, doesn't it, that all government actions have consequences, and often it's the law of unintended consequences. But the consequence here is that if you are 28, 29, 30, back in the 80s and 90s, you would expect to be at least being able to get onto the housing ladder. You would have been able, over the previous 5 or 6 years, you would have probably been able to save up enough money for a 10% deposit on a house or a flat. That is no longer the case. And it is in part because of student loans. Now, that obviously doesn't apply to the whole population, only 50%. But if you have 50% of people who feel that they will never be able to get onto the housing ladder because of this, you've got a huge raft of people who just lose confidence in the whole system.
And where do they live? And that's the thing, sorry to interrupt, but where do they live? So, for example, he's living in a 2-bed flat with one of his friends because it's the final year, some went into work placement. So there's 2 of them there. There were 5 of them in a big house last year. So there's 2 of them, £800 a month plus bills on top. So I'm paying that £900 a month. Yes, he's working in between. Of course he is, but it's quite flat out the course he's doing at the moment. He's in his final year. So that's without the cost of the uni fees that are now well over £9,500. I just feel for the students, and I see it all the time. Being a mortgage advisor, that's what I see. And a lot of children are fortunate. Yes, they are, but there's a hell of a lot that aren't. And it shouldn't come down to that. because they're working hard. If they choose to go, I mean, I don't believe in Mickey Mouse degrees, as I would call them, but if there's a degree for a reason, it's an experience, it's life, and if you're going to use it for good in the future and it's going to help, then that's great, isn't it? But Scotland as well, getting it for free, still don't understand that. And the Barnett formula. I don't understand that either.
God.
But anyway, don't start me off. You can tell I'm quite old.
Don't open that can of worms.
No, I won't, sorry. But I just wanted to say, but please just check that. It's definitely, I'm sure, 40 years now.
I think it is, yeah.
Yeah, so that's even worse. And a 9% on top of what you normally pay the tax. It's obscene.
Well, I wasn't intending this hour to be depressing, but I mean, it is a bit, because you and all the other callers have articulated what the problem is. And I don't understand why it is so difficult for politicians from any of the parties to come up with a solution to this. I mean, I haven't heard, if Reform UK want to become the government of the country, they're going to have a policy on this. I haven't heard a peep out of them on this particular policy. Maybe they will have some ideas, but certainly, and I'm sure Zach Polanski, if he were here, would say that, well, it should be the taxpayer that's funding all of higher education. Well, fine, but you've actually got to work out how much income tax would have to increase by, and then they'll just say, oh, well, you just tax the rich a little bit more so they can make a little bit more of a contribution. And we all know what happens when you do that. Karen, thank you. Emilio says, I've been at uni for a year and a half and it's been horrendous. I already owe more than I've ever seen in my life and I only get 2 days of scheduled lessons. Half of the time we don't have the resources or the tutors won't be present. I feel like I'm being scammed and it's emotionally taxing. I completely get that, because I think if you feel that you're not getting value for money, if you're not getting the face time with your tutors, with your professors, and everything is learnt in front of a screen, I mean, no wonder you feel you're being scammed. But the system shouldn't allow this to happen. There should be minimum standards. You should be told before you go to university, you will have such, 4 lectures a week, 3 tutorials a week, or whatever. So you make your decision based on that knowledge. But it sounds to me as if you weren't told that, because if you had been, you probably wouldn't have gone in the first place. 0345 6060 973. What's been your experience of student loans? What would you like to see changed about the student loans system? It's 9:48.
Coming up at 10 on LBC, Ben Kentish.
Trump says time is running out to prevent war with Iran, but should the US take military action and should Britain support it? Plus, talking of Trump, should England boycott the US World Cup because of him?
Ben Kentish at 10. Listen on our free Global Player app or the new LBC app.
Octopus
Dale on LBC.
10 to 10 on LBC. Tim says, I went to uni in 2009 and I'm lucky that I didn't pay as much as people are paying now. What I find mad is that at 17, I wouldn't have been able to walk into a car dealership and take out finance on a £40,000 BMW, but I was able to sign up for £40,000 of university debt with very little scrutiny. That level of borrowing was presented as normal, inevitable even, without the same checks, warnings, or clarity you'd get for any other financial commitment of that size. At that age, you're not really equipped to understand long-term interest, repayment thresholds, or what happens if your degree doesn't lead to the kind of salary you're being encouraged to expect. Well, all very fair comments indeed, I would say. Another one here says, Ian, excuse me, one of my daughters was the first student in 2012 to have to pay £9,000 per annum tuition fees. This wasn't a Labour government. Compound interest was charged from day one of taking out the loan. She now owes £54,000. Fortunately, she's an actress and doesn't earn enough to start paying anything back. However, my two other children have been paying back student loans for 5 years and still owe more than they started with. I mean, that says it all, doesn't it? How, after 5 years, can you still owe more than you started with because of the outrageous level of interest rates? I'm going to talk to Jackie Smith about this, the university's minister. I mean, as you know, she's a very good friend of mine, and I hope she'll take a lot of this seriously, because I don't think it's going to come as a great surprise to her. And it may be, for all we know, and I haven't discussed this with her before, but it may be that she has recognise that there's a problem here. But it's not her decision, because it's the Treasury that would have to decide to do something here. And the Treasury will never make a decision which means that there's less income for the Treasury. It's as simple as that. So as a Minister of State and not a Cabinet Minister, I mean, she may well be able to deploy the Secretary of State, Bridget Phillipson, in this. But again, the Treasury is all-powerful, and that is part of the real problem with our political system, that you cannot do anything in government without Treasury approval. That is why the Chancellor of the Exchequer is so all-powerful in a way. In fact, in many ways, more powerful than the Prime Minister. Let's go to Gareth, who's a first-time caller in York. Hello, Gareth.
Hello, Ian, and
hi.
Thanks. Great show. I always love listening to you.
Thank you.
Pleasure. I was just going to bring up the point as well of student accommodation. I've got a daughter who's going into second year, and you have to organise your accommodation, and it's close to £800 a month that you have to pay for the full year, even though they're only at university for, I don't know, 9 months or 8 months. And that is also, just exorbitant as well. That's on top of that. And because they get part of their money in the maintenance fee, but the parents often have to top up. And then the maintenance fee is also only paid at certain time periods. And then, as I said, the parents are then responsible. And that's for one room that you share with 3 other people. So, I mean, that is as well as just adding, so much more fuel to the fire, really.
I can remember when I was at university, and this would have been 1981, and then I had student accommodation also in my final year in 1985, and I was paying £180 per term.
Wow.
Now, okay, inflation has gone up a lot since those days, but I think my student grant from Essex County Council covered it all, so I didn't have any bills to pay. I don't remember that my parents ever particularly gave me any money to survive on, so I must have had enough money to buy food and all the rest of it from the student grant as well. I mean, it was totally different times, and as I said before, I'm not sure that I would have gone to university had there been this kind of system there now. Yeah, no, as I said, it's eye-opening, and I don't know what could be done, but I guess there has to be a specific type of arrangements for students. Not everyone wants to rent homes to students, so I guess they have to make up the money. But that is that's close to what people pay for a 3-bedroom house, for a family, and that's just for one room. So yeah, it is crazy. But thanks for bringing this up, and I hope you can get your friend on the hook about this. Well, we will see. We did ask her to come on the programme tonight, but she would have had a previous engagement. Or was it a subsequent engagement, as I cheekily say? Thank you very much, Gareth. Now, somebody here says, it's Kevin in Wolverhampton, I had a student loan in the early 2000s. I wanted to pay it off more quickly than I was due to, and the student loan company told me they couldn't tell me how much I still owed until the end of the financial year because the money was paid to HMRC, who then paid it on to the student loan company. I don't know if this is still how it works, though. I suspect it probably does, Kevin, and it probably shouldn't work like that. Right, let's go to Kelly in Woodford. Hello, Kelly.
Oh, hello. So
Hi.
I am a teacher, so I really value education, but I don't agree with going to university in 2026. I think it's a national disgrace, to be quite honest. So I've got a daughter who's in the second year of a degree apprenticeship, which is phenomenal. They're really, really competitive, though, and very difficult to get, so she was very lucky. So her company are paying for her degree, and she gets a good salary as well. I've got a son who's in year 13 who would really like to go to university, but I'm doing everything possible to persuade him not to.
Is he academically capable of doing a degree?
He is.
And what? I mean, I don't know whether he's decided what he wants to do after leaving school, but I mean, whatever profession he goes into or job he goes into, would he require a degree for that?
He would. So we are trying to get him a degree apprenticeship. He's applied to 82 companies so far. It's really hard. So every company that you apply for, there's about 5 rounds for a degree apprenticeship. So the application forms generally take between an hour to 2 hours because there's essay questions you have to answer, research the company.
And you've done 82 of these?
82. He's
Wow.
done 82 so far.
Would be a parent.
If you pass that round, you then have to do tests. So English tests, maths tests, verbal tests, non-verbal reasoning, critical thinking tests. If you pass that round, you have a video interview with a bot, so an AI bot. If you pass that round, you then have to go to an assessment centre, a group assessment and an individual presentation. Generally, if you pass that, you then get a one-to-one interview. So and that's while he's doing his A-levels as well. He's got his exams in May. It's really difficult.
And of those 82, I mean, how many are you going through that process with?
What? Sorry, I don't understand the question.
Well, the 82 applications, I mean, you can't have done all of those to that level of complexity.
Wow. A lot of them he doesn't get through the first round or the second round or the third round. He's made it through so far to 4 assessment centres. So he's got 2 assessment centres next week. He got to the final stage of Deloitte, but unfortunately didn't get that position.
Well, we wish him all the best. I'd love to talk to you a bit longer, but we've reached the end of the programme. Thank you very much indeed. And thanks for all of your calls and messages this evening. I'll be back tomorrow from 7. Coming up at 1 on LBC, it's Richard Spur. But right now, it's Ben Kentish.
Iain, thank you very much indeed. Hello there. A very good evening to you this Wednesday night on the show.
I think he prefers some sort of a deal, but he wants a